Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. My name is Michael Gonzalez, and what happened to me feels like it's from some kind of twisted nightmare. I always thought I was a pretty average guy. Grew up in a quiet town called Whispering Pines in Montana, worked at a hardware store. Life was simple, you know. It was all about small joys and routine. I wasn't prepared for the terror that would turn my life upside down. It was 2011. I was living in a cabin just outside Whispering Pines, Montana. It was a modest place, but I liked the solitude. The cabin sat on the edge of a dense forest, its weathered wood blending seamlessly with the surrounding pines. Every morning I'd wake up to the sound of birds chirping and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. It wasn't much, but it was home. My friends used to joke about how I was becoming a hermit, but I enjoyed the peace and quiet after working all day at Riverside Hardware, the store my grandpa started back in the day. The store was a Whispering Pines institution, its creaky wooden floors and overstuffed shelves a familiar comfort to everyone in town. I'd taken over running it a few years back when Grandpa's arthritis got too bad for him to manage the day-to-day operations. Most days followed the same comfortable pattern. I'd wake up early, brew a pot of coffee, and sit on my porch watching the mist rise off the nearby lake. Then I'd head into town, open up the store, and spend the day helping folks find just the right tool for their latest project, or chatting with the regulars who'd stop by more for conversation than any real need for hardware. Evenings were quiet affairs. I'd usually heat up some leftovers, maybe crack open a beer, and lose myself in a good book or an old movie on TV. It wasn't an exciting life by most standards, but it suited me just fine. I had my routine, my peace, and my solitude. Little did I know how much I'd come to miss that simplicity in the days to come. One crisp autumn evening, as I was closing up the store, my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my friend Alex, his enthusiasm practically bouncing through the phone. "Mike, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice pitched high with excitement. "I found the perfect spot for our camping trip this weekend." I groaned inwardly. Alex was the adventurous type, always dragging me into his schemes. We'd been friends since high school, and despite our different personalities, we'd managed to stay close over the years. Where I was content with my quiet life, Alex was always chasing the next thrill. "Camping trip?" I asked, feigning ignorance. I don't remember agreeing to any camping trip. Alex laughed, the sound tinny through the phone's speaker. "Come on, man. We've been talking about this for weeks. You can't back out now. I've already got Nate and his girlfriend Sophia on board." I sighed, knowing I was fighting a losing battle. Alex had a way of wearing down my resistance, his enthusiasm infectious even to a homebody like me. All right, I conceded. "Where's this perfect spot of yours?" "It's in Evergreen National Forest, about an hour's drive from Whispering Pines," Alex explained, his excitement building. "There's this old hiking trail that leads to some abandoned mining towns. It's supposed to be incredible." I had to admit, the idea did sound intriguing. It had been a while since I'd ventured out of my comfort zone, and maybe a weekend away would do me some good. "Okay, you've got me," I said. "When do we leave?" "That's the spirit," Alex cheered. "We'll pick you up Friday after work. Pack for a couple of nights, and don't forget your hiking boots." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of anticipation and unease. It would be good to get out of town for a bit, to break up the monotony of my daily routine, but there was something else, a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't quite place. I shook it off, chalking it up to pre-trip jitters. Little did I know that this feeling was my subconscious trying to warn me of the horrors that lay ahead. Friday arrived quicker than I expected. The week at the hardware store had been busy, with everyone in town seemingly deciding to start their home improvement projects at once. By the time I locked up the store on Friday evening, I was actually looking forward to the camping trip, seeing it as a much-needed break from the daily grind. I had just finished throwing my backpack into the bed of my old pickup truck when I heard the honk of a horn. Alex's battered SUV pulled up in front of my cabin, music blaring from the open windows. Alex leaned out, grinning from ear to ear. "Ready for an adventure, Mike?" I couldn't help but smile back. Alex's enthusiasm was always contagious. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, tossing my backpack into the SUV and climbing into the back seat. Nate and Sophia were already settled in, Nate in the passenger seat and Sophia next to me in the back. Nate was a quiet guy, someone I knew mostly through Alex. He worked as an accountant in Whispering Pines and was about as far from the outdoorsy type as you could get. Sophia, on the other hand, seemed to share Alex's love for adventure. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as Alex pulled away from my cabin and headed for the highway. As we drove, Alex regaled us with stories about the Evergreen National Forest and the abandoned mining towns we were going to explore. "I've been reading up on the history," he said, his eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. "These towns were booming in the late 1800s, but they were all abandoned by the 1920s. Some say they're haunted." Sophia leaned forward, intrigued. "Haunted, really?" Alex nodded eagerly. "Oh yeah, there are all kinds of stories. Miners who died in cave-ins, outlaws who hid out there. Some people even claim to have seen strange lights in the forest at night." I exchanged a skeptical look with Nate. "Come on, Alex," I said. "You don't really believe in that stuff, do you?" Alex just shrugged, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I'm just saying, Mike, there's a lot of history in those woods. Who knows what we might find?" As we continued our drive, the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The familiar landscape of Whispering Pines gave way to the dense forests of Evergreen National Park. The trees seemed to press in on either side of the road, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I found myself growing quieter as we drove deeper into the forest. The nagging feeling of unease I'd experienced earlier in the week returned, stronger now. I tried to shake it off, focusing instead on the conversation in the car. Alex and Sophia were excitedly discussing the hike we had planned for the next day, while Nate occasionally chimed in with a question or comment. By the time we reached the campground, night had fully fallen. The forest around us was pitch black, broken only by the beam of Alex's headlights and the occasional flicker of our flashlights. We set up our tents in a small clearing, the beam of our headlamps casting eerie shadows among the trees. As we sat around the campfire that night, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories, I found myself repeatedly glancing into the darkness beyond our little circle of light. More than once I thought I saw movement in the shadows, but when I looked closer, there was nothing there. "You okay, Mike?" Sophia asked, noticing my distraction. "You seem a little on edge." I forced a smile, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied. "Just not used to being out in the woods like this, I guess." Alex laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Don't worry, buddy. There's nothing out there but trees and maybe a few raccoons. Try to relax and enjoy yourself." I nodded, but as I crawled into my tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. If only I had known then how right that feeling was. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the early morning mist quickly burning off under the warm autumn sun. As we ate our breakfast of instant oatmeal and camp coffee, Alex laid out the plan for the day. "So, I've got this map," he said, spreading a wrinkled piece of paper on the picnic table. "It shows an old trail that leads to a couple of the abandoned mining towns. The closest one is called Silver Creek. It's about a 3-hour hike from here." Nate peered at the map, his brow furrowed. "Are you sure this trail is still maintained? It looks pretty old." Alex waved off his concern. "Don't worry about it. I'm sure it'll be fine. Besides, where's your sense of adventure?" I shared a look with Nate, both of us clearly having second thoughts about this expedition. But Sophia was already packing up her backpack, her eyes shining with excitement. "Come on, guys. This is going to be amazing. How often do you get to explore real ghost towns?" Unable to argue with her enthusiasm, we finished packing up our day packs and set off into the forest. At first the hike was pleasant enough. The trail, though overgrown in places, was still visible, winding its way through the towering pines. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But as the hours wore on, the trail became less and less defined. We found ourselves having to push through thick undergrowth, the branches scratching at our arms and faces. The trees seemed to grow denser, their canopy blocking out more and more of the sunlight. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" I asked Alex after we had been hiking for what felt like far more than 3 hours. Alex consulted his map, turning it this way and that. I could see the doubt in his eyes, even as he tried to sound confident. Yeah, of course. We must be getting close now. The map shows a creek just ahead. Once we cross that, we should be able to see Silver Creek. But as we pressed on, there was no sign of a creek. The forest around us had grown eerily quiet. The bird song and animal noises that had accompanied us earlier now conspicuously absent. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. It was Sophia who first noticed something was wrong. She stopped suddenly, causing Nate to bump into her. "Do you guys smell that?" she asked, her nose wrinkled in disgust. We all paused, sniffing the air. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, just the usual forest scents of pine and damp earth. But then it hit me, a faint, sickly sweet odor that made my stomach turn. "What is that?" Nate asked, his face pale. Before anyone could answer, we heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating through the trees. We all froze, our eyes darting around the forest. The trees suddenly seemed menacing, their branches reaching out like claws, the shadows between them deep and impenetrable. Maybe we should head back," I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. For once, Alex didn't argue. He nodded, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Yeah, let's get out of here." But as we turned to retrace our steps, we realized with growing horror that we couldn't recognize anything around us. The forest seemed to have closed in, erasing any sign of the trail we had followed. We were lost, deep in an unknown forest, with night rapidly approaching and something out there in the darkness. Something that, judging by that inhuman growl, was far from friendly. The adventure we had so eagerly embarked on that morning had just turned into a nightmare. As the reality of our situation sank in, panic began to set in. Sophia clutched Nate's arm, her earlier excitement replaced by fear. Alex kept checking and rechecking his map, muttering under his breath while I scanned the darkening forest, straining my ears for any repeat of that terrifying growl. "We need to find shelter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's getting dark, and we don't want to be stumbling around these woods at night." The others nodded in agreement, relieved to have some sort of plan. We set off in what we hoped was the direction of our campsite, but deep down I think we all knew we were just guessing. As we walked, the forest seemed to come alive around us. Shadows danced at the edge of our vision, and more than once I could have sworn I saw eyes gleaming in the darkness between the trees. The sweet, rotting smell grew stronger, making us gag. Just when it seemed like we would have to resign ourselves to spending the night huddled at the base of a tree, we stumbled into a small clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated cabin. "Thank God," Sophia breathed, relief evident in her voice. But as we approached the cabin, my sense of unease grew. The building looked ancient, its wood gray and rotting, the windows dark, empty sockets. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, swinging slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. "I don't know about this," I said, hesitating at the edge of the clearing. "Maybe we should keep looking for a way back to our camp." Alex shook his head. "It's almost completely dark, Mike. We don't have a choice. Besides," he added with a forced laugh, "it's shelter, right? Better than being out in the open." Reluctantly, I followed the others into the cabin. The interior was musty and filled with shadows. Old, broken furniture was scattered about, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. In one corner, an old pot-bellied stove sat cold and rusted. "Let's see if we can get some light in here," Nate suggested, pulling out his flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing cobwebs in the corners and what looked disturbingly like claw marks on the walls. We settled in as best we could, clearing a space on the floor and using our backpacks as pillows. Nobody suggested trying to start a fire in the old stove. Somehow, the idea of drawing attention to ourselves seemed dangerous. As we lay there in the darkness, listening to the strange noises of the forest outside, I found myself wide awake, every nerve on edge. Beside me, I could hear Sophia's quiet sobs and Nate's attempts to comfort her. Alex was unnaturally still, but I could tell by his breathing that he wasn't asleep either. It was in those dark, quiet hours that I first heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from outside the cabin. At first I tried to convince myself it was just a branch scraping against the wall, But as it continued, growing louder and more insistent, I knew it was something else. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Guys," I whispered, "do you hear that?" The others stirred, and I heard sharp intakes of breath as they too registered the sound. It was moving now, circling the cabin. Occasionally it would pause, and in those moments of silence we could hear a low, rumbling breath like some massive creature scenting the air. "What is it?" Sophia whimpered, her voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, there was a tremendous crash as something slammed against the cabin wall. The whole structure shook, dust and debris raining down on us. We scrambled to our feet, pressing ourselves against the far wall. In the dim moonlight filtering through the broken windows, I saw a massive shape move past. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Far too big to be a bear or a wolf, its movements fluid yet somehow wrong. Another crash, and one of the boarded-up windows exploded inward. A long clawed arm reached through the opening, groping blindly in the darkness. The claws were easily as long as my forearm, wickedly curved and sharp. "Run!" I yelled, my paralysis finally breaking. We bolted for the door, not caring about the noise we were making. All that mattered was getting away from the monstrosity trying to break into the cabin. We burst out into the night, the cool air hitting our faces like a slap. Behind us, we could hear the creature tearing into the cabin, wood splintering and glass shattering. Its roar echoed through the forest, a sound of primal hunger and rage that chilled me to my core. "This way!" Alex shouted, veering off to the left. We followed blindly, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs. Branches whipped at our faces and thorns tore at our clothes, but we didn't slow down. The sounds of pursuit were all too clear behind us. The snapping of branches, the heavy thud of something large moving at incredible speed. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that desperate flight through the dark forest. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. Beside me I could hear the labored breathing of the others, punctuated by Sophia's occasional sobs. Suddenly Alex, who was in the lead, disappeared from view with a startled yell. We skidded to a stop at the edge of a steep ravine. In the dim moonlight, I could just make out Alex's form about 15 feet below, sprawled on a ledge. "Alex!" Sophia called down, her voice shrill with panic. "Are you okay?" There was a groan from below, then Alex's voice, pained but alive. "Yeah, I think so. My ankle. I think it's broken." Before we could figure out how to help him, that bone-chilling roar sounded again, much closer this time. We could hear trees crashing down as the creature plowed through the forest towards us. "We have to get down there," Nate said, already lowering himself over the edge of the ravine. "It's our only chance." I helped Sophia start climbing down, then began my own descent. The rock face was steep and slippery with moss, and in our haste we were careless. I heard a scream and looked down just in time to see Sophia lose her grip and fall. She hit the ledge hard, rolling dangerously close to the edge before Nate managed to grab her. By the time I reached the ledge, the creature had arrived at the top of the ravine. In the moonlight, I caught my first clear glimpse of our pursuer. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be a nightmarish blend of bear and man. Its fur was matted and patchy, revealing gray, leathery skin beneath. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. A distorted, almost human visage with glowing yellow eyes and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. The beast roared in frustration, pacing along the edge of the ravine. It seemed reluctant to attempt the climb down, and for a moment I dared to hope we might be safe. But then it began to search for a way down, its massive form disappearing and reappearing between the trees as it moved along the ravine's edge. We knew it was only a matter of time before it found a path to us. "There," Nate whispered, pointing to a dark opening in the rock face behind us. "I think it's a cave. Maybe we can hide in there." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. I helped Alex to his feet, letting him lean on me as we stumbled towards the cave entrance. Nate supported Sophia, who seemed to be in shock, her eyes wide and unfocused. The cave was pitch black inside and filled with the sound of dripping water. The air was damp and cold, with that same sickly sweet odor we'd noticed earlier, only much stronger now. As our eyes adjusted to the darkness, I began to make out shapes in the gloom, oddly regular formations that didn't look natural. Sophia fumbled with her backpack and managed to produce a small flashlight. As the beam played over our surroundings, we all gasped in horror. We weren't in a natural cave at all. but some kind of underground chamber, and scattered all around us were bones, hundreds of them, in various states of decay. "Oh God," Alex moaned, his face pale in the flashlight's beam. "What is this place?" Before anyone could answer, we heard the creature's roar again, much closer this time. It had found a way down. "Turn off the light," I hissed. Sophia clicked off the flashlight, plunging us back into darkness. We pressed ourselves against the damp cave wall, hardly daring to breathe as we listened to the sounds of the creature's approach. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel outside the cave entrance. A low rumbling growl echoed off the cave walls. I could feel the others trembling beside me, and I knew we were all thinking the same thing. This was it. We were trapped, injured, and exhausted. There was nowhere left to run. The creature's massive form blocked out what little light was coming from the cave entrance. I could hear it sniffing the air, and I knew that even if it couldn't see us, it could smell us. We were done for. But then something unexpected happened. Another roar sounded in the distance, similar to our pursuers but distinctly different. The creature at the cave entrance growled in response, seeming agitated. After a moment of what appeared to be indecision, it turned and lumbered away, its roars fading into the distance as it apparently went to confront the newcomer. We remained frozen in place for what felt like hours, hardly daring to believe in our reprieve. Finally, when the forest had been silent for a long while, Nate spoke up. I think it's gone," he whispered. Sophia clicked on her flashlight again, and we looked at each other in the harsh beam. We were a sorry sight, clothes torn, covered in dirt and scratches, our faces pale with fear and exhaustion. "What do we do now?" Sophia asked, her voice small and frightened. I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly despite the terror and exhaustion clouding my mind. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Find our way back to civilization. But first, we need to tend to our injuries and try to get some rest. We're no good to ourselves stumbling around in the dark." The others nodded in agreement, too worn out to argue. We did our best to make ourselves comfortable, using our backpacks as pillows and huddling together for warmth. None of us wanted to think too hard about the bones surrounding us or what they might mean. As I lay there in the darkness, listening to the quiet breathing of my friends and the occasional drip of water, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. Whatever was out there in the forest, whatever had made this grisly lair, it wasn't going to let us go easily. And as sleep finally claimed me, my dreams were filled with glowing yellow eyes and the sound of that terrible, inhuman roar. I awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. As the events of the previous night came rushing back, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We had survived the night. Sunlight was streaming in through the cave entrance, illuminating our macabre shelter in harsh detail. The others were stirring as well, groaning as they stretched out muscles stiff from sleeping on the hard cave floor. In the light of day, our injuries looked even worse. Alex's ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, and Sophia's arms were covered in cuts and bruises from her fall. "We need to get moving," I said, my voice hoarse. "We don't know how long that thing will stay away." Nobody argued. We gathered our meager supplies and helped Alex to his feet. He gritted his teeth against the pain but managed to hobble along with Nate's support. As we emerged from the cave, I was struck by how normal everything looked in the morning light. Birds were singing, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It was hard to believe that just hours ago we had been running for our lives through this same forest. "Which way?" Sophia asked, her eyes darting nervously between the trees. I looked up at the sun, trying to orient myself. "If we keep the sun on our left, we should be heading roughly east. That's got to lead us out of the forest eventually." It was as good a plan as any. We set off, moving as quickly as we could given our injuries and exhaustion. The going was tough, the underbrush was thick, and the ground was uneven. Every snapping twig or rustle in the bushes made us freeze, our hearts pounding as we waited for some monstrous shape to come bursting out at us. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. More than once I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to see nothing when I turned to look. The others were on edge too. I could see it in the tense set of their shoulders, the way their eyes constantly scanned the forest around us. It was nearing midday when we stumbled upon something that made us all stop in our tracks. There, half hidden by the underbrush, was an old, rusted-out pickup truck. It was the first sign of human presence we'd seen since entering the forest, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope. Maybe we were closer to civilization than we thought. But as we approached the truck, that hope quickly turned to dread. The vehicle was ancient, its paint almost completely worn away, its tires rotted down to the rims. It had clearly been here for decades. "Should we check inside?" Nate asked, his voice uncertain. Before anyone could answer, the wind shifted, and that sickly sweet odor we'd encountered before wafted over us. It was coming from the truck. "Oh, God," Sophia gagged, turning away. Against my better judgment, I approached the driver's side door. It was slightly ajar, and with a deep breath I pulled it open. The stench that billowed out was overwhelming, a miasma of decay that made my eyes water. But it was what I saw inside that made my blood run cold. The remnants of a corpse sat in the driver's seat, but it wasn't human, or at least, not entirely. The skull was elongated, the jaw filled with sharp, pointed teeth. The body was covered in patches of matted fur, and the hands ended in vicious claws. "What the hell is that?" Alex breathed, peering over my shoulder. I shook my head, unable to find words. Whatever this thing was, it was like nothing I'd ever seen or heard of before. And yet, there was something disturbingly familiar about it, like a twisted, nightmarish version of the creature that had chased us the night before. As I stared at the grisly remains, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, something caught my eye. Clutched in one clawed hand was what looked like an old leather-bound journal. Without thinking, I reached in and grabbed it, stuffing it into my backpack. "We need to go," I said, slamming the truck door shut. "Now." We set off again, our pace quicker now despite our exhaustion. The discovery of the truck and its grotesque occupant had shaken us all, reminding us of the very real danger we were in. As we walked, my mind raced. What was that thing in the truck? How was it connected to the creature that had chased us? And what secrets might that journal hold? I was desperate for answers, but I knew that our priority had to be getting out of this forest alive. The day wore on and our progress slowed. We were all exhausted, hungry, and thirsty. Our water supplies had run out hours ago, and the forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Worse, that feeling of being watched had intensified. More than once I was sure I heard heavy footsteps paralleling our path, always just out of sight. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, we were forced to confront a terrifying reality. We would have to spend another night in this nightmare forest. "We need to find shelter," I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Somewhere defensible." We eventually found a small clearing with a large, hollow log. It wasn't much, but it was the best we could do. As night fell, we huddled together inside the log, too exhausted and terrified to even think about starting a fire. In the darkness, I pulled out the journal I'd taken from the truck. I knew I should try to sleep, to conserve my strength for whatever tomorrow might bring. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers we needed might be contained in these pages. Using Sophia's flashlight, careful to keep the beam pointed away from the log's openings, I began to read. The journal was old, the handwriting spidery and difficult to decipher in places. But as I read, a story began to emerge, a story so fantastic and terrifying that I could scarcely believe it. The journal belonged to a man named Dr. Ethan Blackwood, a scientist who had come to these woods in the 1950s to study local wildlife. But what he found here was beyond anything he could have imagined. As I delved deeper into Dr. Blackwood's journal, the world around me seemed to fade away. The cramped confines of the hollow log, the quiet breathing of my exhausted friends, even the ever-present fear of what might be lurking in the darkness outside, all of it receded as I lost myself in the scientist's account. Dr. Blackwood had come to the Evergreen National Forest in the spring of 1953, drawn by reports of unusual animal behavior in the area. At first, his research had been mundane, tracking animal populations, collecting specimens, the usual work of a field biologist. But as the weeks went by, he began to notice strange inconsistencies. Animals that shouldn't have been in this ecosystem, tracks that didn't match any known species, and most disturbing of all, evidence of intelligence and tool use among the local wildlife that went far beyond anything that should have been possible. As I read on, my hands shaking slightly, I realized that Dr. Blackwood's observations were becoming increasingly erratic. He wrote of hearing voices in the forest, of seeing shapes moving in the shadows that defied explanation. And then, about 2 months into his stay, everything changed. The entry was dated June 15, 1953. The handwriting was shaky, the page stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. "I've seen it," Dr. Blackwood wrote. "God help me, I've seen it with my own eyes. The stories were true, all of them. The old mining towns weren't abandoned, they were evacuated. The government covered it up, but they knew. They've always known." The next few pages were a frantic, almost incoherent account of what Dr. Blackwood had discovered. According to him, the abandoned silver mines in the area weren't just played out. They had uncovered something that had been buried deep in the earth for millions of years. "It's not just one creature," the journal continued. "It's a whole ecosystem, a parallel evolution that's been going on right beneath our feet. But the miners disturbed their habitat, and now they're coming to the surface." As I read on, my blood ran cold. Dr. Blackwood described creatures that sounded horrifyingly familiar, massive, bear-like beasts with near-human intelligence. But these weren't the only things emerging from the depths. There were others, smaller, faster creatures that hunted in packs, flying things that haunted the night skies, and worst of all, parasites that could infect and transform other life forms. "They're changing," Dr. Blackwood wrote, "adapting to the surface world, and they're smart. God, they're so much smarter than we ever imagined. They can mimic us, infiltrate us. How long before they spread beyond these woods? How long before they overrun everything?" The final entries in the journal were a mixture of scientific observations and increasingly paranoid ramblings. Dr. Blackwood was convinced that he was being hunted, that the creatures were closing in on him. His last entry, dated nearly a month after he'd first encountered the creatures, was brief and chilling. "They're here. If anyone finds this, run. Run as far and as fast as you can. And whatever you do, don't let them catch you. Death would be a mercy compared to what they have planned." I closed the journal, my mind reeling. It was fantastic, unbelievable, and yet, after what we'd seen and experienced, I couldn't dismiss it. The creature that had chased us, the thing I'd found in the truck, they fit with what Dr. Blackwood had described. But if he was right, if there really was some kind of underground ecosystem of monstrous creatures emerging in these woods, then our situation was far worse than we'd imagined. We weren't just lost in the forest. We were trapped in the hunting grounds of something beyond our worst nightmares. I looked at my sleeping friends, debating whether to wake them and share what I'd learned. But they were exhausted, and we'd need all our strength for the challenges ahead. I decided to let them rest, resolving to tell them everything in the morning. As I tried to settle into an uneasy sleep, my mind raced with questions. How much of Dr. Blackwood's account could we trust? Was he really describing some kind of underground ecosystem, or had he simply gone mad in these woods? And if he was right, what did it mean for us, for the world beyond this forest? I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I knew I was being shaken awake by Nate. "Mike," he whispered urgently, "something's out there." Instantly alert, I sat up, straining my ears. At first all I could hear was the usual nighttime sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl. But then I heard it, a soft rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, but too deep and resonant to be human. We all froze, hardly daring to breathe ourselves. The sound was getting closer, accompanied now by the crack of twigs and the rustle of underbrush. Whatever it was big. Sophia whimpered softly, and Alex put a hand over her mouth, his eyes wide with fear. We pressed ourselves as far back into the hollow log as we could, praying that whatever was out there wouldn't notice us. A shadow fell across the opening of our shelter, blotting out the faint moonlight. I could smell that now familiar, sickly sweet odor, stronger than ever. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the creature must be able to hear it. For what felt like an eternity, we waited in terrified silence. I could hear the creature snuffling at the entrance of the log, its hot breath gusting inside. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the shadow moved away. The breathing sound receded, and after a few minutes the forest fell silent once more. We waited for what must have been another hour before any of us dared to move or speak. Finally, Nate broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I took a deep breath, knowing I couldn't keep what I'd learned to myself any longer. I think I know what's going on here," I said quietly, "and you're not going to like it." Over the next hour, as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I told them everything I'd read in Dr. Blackwood's journal. To their credit, they listened without interrupting, though I could see the disbelief and fear growing in their eyes as I spoke. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Alex spoke up. "This is insane," he said, shaking his head. "Underground monsters? Government cover-ups? It sounds like something out of a bad sci-fi movie." "I know how it sounds," I replied, "but after what we've seen, can you really say it's impossible?" Sophia hugged herself, shivering despite the warm morning air. "So what do we do now?" she asked. I didn't have a good answer for her. We were lost, injured, and now faced with the possibility that we were trapped in the middle of some kind of monstrous incursion. Our situation seemed hopeless. But as I looked at the frightened faces of my friends, I knew we couldn't give up. We had to find a way out of this forest, to warn the outside world about what was happening here. "We keep moving," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We head east, like we planned. But we need to be smart about it. No more traveling at night. We find secure shelter before sunset no matter what, and we stay quiet, stay alert." The others nodded, clinging to the small comfort of having a plan, no matter how desperate. As we crawled out of our makeshift shelter and into the early morning light, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest that had seemed so peaceful just days ago now felt alien and hostile, hiding untold dangers behind every tree and shadow. We set off, moving as quickly and quietly as we could through the underbrush. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made us jump. More than once I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to see nothing when I turned to look. As the day wore on, the heat became oppressive. We were all dehydrated, our water supplies long since exhausted. When we came across a small stream around midday, the temptation to drink was almost overwhelming. "Wait," I said, holding out an arm to stop Sophia as she moved towards the water. "We don't know if it's safe." "We'll die of thirst if we don't drink something," Alex argued, his voice hoarse. I hesitated, torn between the very real risk of dehydration and the unknown dangers the water might pose. In the end, our thirst won out. We filled our water bottles and drank deeply, hoping we weren't making a terrible mistake. As we rested by the stream, I pulled out Dr. Blackwood's journal again, hoping to find some clue that might help us. As I flipped through the pages, a folded piece of paper fell out. It was a map, crudely drawn but showing clear landmarks, including the stream we were resting beside. "Guys," I said, excitement creeping into my voice for the first time in days, "I think I know where we are." We clustered around the map. According to Dr. Blackwood's notes, we were about 10 miles from the edge of the forest, 10 miles from safety. It wasn't much, but it was hope, something we desperately needed. With renewed determination, we set off again. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to notice something strange. The forest was changing. The familiar pines and oaks were giving way to trees I didn't recognize, trees with oddly shaped leaves and bark that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "Does anyone else think these woods look different?" Nate asked nervously. Before anyone could answer, we heard a sound that made us all freeze in our tracks. It was a high-pitched keening, almost like the cry of a bird, but with an otherworldly quality that sent shivers down my spine. "Run," I whispered, and we took off through the strange forest, the alien cry echoing behind us. As we ran, the world around us seemed to shift and warp. The trees blurred together, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. The ground beneath our feet became spongy and uneven, making each step a struggle. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that nightmarish landscape, but suddenly we burst out of the tree line and found ourselves standing on the edge of a vast clearing. Before us stretched a sight that defied explanation. It looked like a city, but unlike any city I'd ever seen. Enormous structures of what looked like bone and crystal rose into the sky, pulsing with an eerie bioluminescent light. Strange, misshapen creatures moved between the buildings, some flying, others crawling or slithering. And at the center of it all was a massive pit, descending into impenetrable darkness. From its depths came a low, thrumming sound that I could feel in my bones. We stood there, frozen in shock and horror, as the realization hit us. We hadn't been moving east towards safety. Somehow we had been drawn deeper into the forest, to the very heart of the nightmare Dr. Blackwood had discovered. As the alien city's inhabitants began to take notice of us, their inhuman cries rising in a terrifying chorus, I knew with grim certainty that our ordeal was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, our minds struggling to process the impossible scene before us. The alien city pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its bizarre architecture defying all logic and reason. The creatures moving through its streets were like nothing I'd ever seen, some vaguely humanoid, others so alien that my brain could barely comprehend their forms. It was Sophia who broke the spell, her voice a terrified whisper. "Oh my God, what is this place?" Her words snapped us back to reality, and with it came the understanding of our immediate danger. The strange inhabitants of the city were becoming aware of our presence. Curious cries and guttural roars were rising from the structures closest to us, and I could see shapes moving in our direction. "We need to hide," I hissed, grabbing Sophia's arm and pulling her back towards the tree line. "Now!" We scrambled back into the cover of the strange, pulsing trees, our hearts pounding in our chests. From our hiding spot, we watched as several creatures emerged from the city, sniffing the air where we had been standing moments before. They were similar to the beast that had chased us earlier, large, bear-like forms with disturbingly human features. But these seemed even more evolved, standing fully upright and using crude tools. "What do we do now?" Alex whispered, his face pale with fear. I pulled out Dr. Blackwood's journal and map, desperately searching for some clue, some hint of a way out of this nightmare. But the doctor's scribblings offered no easy solutions. According to his notes, this underground city was just one of many, a vast network of alien settlements hidden beneath the surface of the earth. "We can't go back," I said finally, my voice low. "Those things are probably all over the forest by now. Our only chance might be to find a way through the city, to the other side." Nate looked at me like I was insane. "Through the city? Are you crazy? We'll be killed." "We might be killed if we stay here too," I argued. "At least in the city, we might find some answers, maybe even a way out." It was a desperate plan, born more from the lack of alternatives than any real hope of success. But as we huddled there in the strange forest, watching the alien city pulse with its eerie light, we knew we had no choice. We waited until nightfall, hoping the cover of darkness would give us some advantage. As the strange phosphorescent lights of the city grew brighter in the gloom, we crept out of our hiding place and towards the nearest structure. Up close, the buildings were even more bizarre. What I had thought was bone and crystal was actually some kind of living material, warm to the touch, and seeming to shift and move subtly under my hand. We moved as quietly as we could, ducking into shadows whenever we heard the approach of the city's inhabitants. Our progress was agonizingly slow. Every step felt like it might be our last, every shadow potentially hiding some monstrous guardian. But somehow we managed to make our way deeper into the city without being detected. As we moved, I began to notice patterns in the city's layout. The structures seemed to be arranged in concentric circles, all focusing inward towards that central pit we had seen earlier. And everywhere there were signs of a society far more advanced than anything Dr. Blackwood's journal had prepared us for. We passed what looked like laboratories, filled with bubbling vats of strange liquids and complex machinery that hummed with energy. In one building we saw rows of giant pods, each containing a half-formed creature that made my stomach turn. "They're not just adapting," I whispered, the horrible realization dawning on me. "They're engineering themselves to survive on the surface." The implications were terrifying. If these creatures succeeded in creating forms that could pass undetected among humans, there would be nothing to stop them from infiltrating and overtaking the surface world. We had just ducked into an alleyway to avoid a passing patrol when Sophia grabbed my arm, pointing towards a building near the center of the city. Unlike the organic structures around it, this one was made of metal and glass, unmistakably human in origin. "What is that?" she whispered. I shook my head, at a loss. But as I stared at the incongruous building, a chill ran down my spine. If there was a human structure here, it meant that someone, somewhere, knew about this place, and they were working with the creatures. We need to get in there, I said, my mouth dry. Whatever's going on, I bet the answers are in that building. Getting to the structure was a nightmare of close calls and heart-stopping moments. Twice we had to backtrack to avoid patrols, and once we spent a terrifying 10 minutes, crouched behind a pulsing wall, as two of the bear-like creatures conversed in guttural growls just feet away from us. But finally, we made it. The door was locked, but Alex, who had worked as a locksmith during college, managed to pick it after a few tense minutes. As we slipped inside, closing the door behind us, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The interior was blessedly normal: fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, the smell of coffee and paper. We found ourselves in what looked like a reception area, complete with a desk and outdated magazines. But the layer of dust covering everything suggested it had been abandoned for some time. Look for anything that might tell us what this place is, I said, moving towards a door marked Administration. We split up, each taking a different room. I found myself in what appeared to be a manager's office. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and a large desk dominated the center of the room. As I rifled through the drawers, I came across a folder labeled Project Prometheus. My hands shaking, I opened it and began to read. What I found inside made my blood run cold. The facility we were in was a government black site established in the 1950s to study the underground ecosystem Dr. Blackwood had discovered. But it had gone far beyond mere observation. The scientist here had been actively collaborating with the more intelligent species, trading technology and knowledge. The government saw the creature's ability to adapt and evolve as a potential goldmine for biological weapons and enhanced soldiers. They provided the aliens with resources and protection, helping to keep their existence secret in exchange for access to their advanced biotechnology. But something had gone wrong. The last reports in the file, dated just a few months ago, spoke of increasing aggression from the creatures, of attacks on personnel, and demands for more resources. The final entry was a frantic request for evacuation, claiming that the aliens were out of control. As I finished reading, I heard Sophia call out from another room, "Guys, you need to see this." I rushed to join the others, the file clutched in my hand. They were standing in what looked like a security room, staring at a bank of monitors. Most of the screens were dark, but one showed a live feed of the cavern outside. The alien city was in an uproar. Creatures of all shapes and sizes were converging on the central pit, their cries audible even through the building's walls. And rising from the pit was a shape that dwarfed everything we'd seen so far, a massive writhing form that seemed to be made of tentacles and eyes and gaping maws. "What is that thing?" Nate breathed, his voice barely a whisper. I shook my head, words failing me. Whatever it was, its emergence seemed to be driving the other creatures into a frenzy. They prostrated themselves before it, their cries reaching a fever pitch. As we watched in horror, the gigantic being began to move, its countless limbs propelling it towards the cavern roof. With a sound like a mountain splitting, it began to tear through the rock, heading upwards. "It's going to the surface," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "We have to stop it. We have to warn someone." But as the words left my mouth, I knew how hopeless they were. We were trapped miles underground, surrounded by an army of alien monsters, watching as their god or leader or whatever it was prepared to emerge into our world. The nightmare was no longer confined to Evergreen National Forest. It was about to become global. The security room erupted into chaos as we all started talking at once, our voices rising in panic. "We have to get out of here," Sophia cried, her eyes wide with terror. "And go where?" Alex shot back. "In case you haven't noticed, we're trapped in an underground city full of monsters." "There has to be a way out," Nate insisted, frantically searching the room for anything that might help. "This place was built by humans, right? So there must be an exit somewhere." I stood there, my mind racing. The others were right. We needed to escape. But the revelation of what was really going on here, the threat that was about to be unleashed on the unsuspecting world above, weighed heavily on me. Could we really just run away? "Wait," I said, holding up my hands to quiet the others. Before we do anything, we need to think this through. Yes, we need to get out of here, but we also can't let that thing reach the surface. We have to find a way to stop it." The looks they gave me ranged from disbelief to outright fear. "Stop it?" Alex repeated incredulously. "Mike, did you see the size of that thing? What could we possibly do against something like that?" I ran a hand through my hair, frustration and fear warring inside me. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we can't just let it happen. Think about it. If that thing reaches the surface, it's game over. Not just for us, but for everyone." Sophia stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Mike's right," she said quietly. "We can't run away from this. We're the only ones who know what's happening. We have to try to stop it." Nate and Alex exchanged a look, then nodded reluctantly. "Okay," Nate said. "So what's the plan?" I turned back to the security monitors, studying them intently. Most of the screens were dark or showed only static, but a few were still operational, giving us a limited view of the alien city and the facility we were in. "First things first," I said, pointing to a screen that showed what looked like a communications room. "We need to try to get a message out. Even if we can't stop this thing ourselves, maybe we can warn someone who can." We made our way through the abandoned facility, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The communications room was a mess of tangled wires and outdated equipment, but after some frantic searching, we managed to find a radio that still had power. Alex, who had some experience with ham radios, fiddled with the dials while the rest of us kept watch. After several tense minutes, we heard a crackle of static, then a voice. "This is Park Ranger Station Echo, do you copy?" We all let out a collective breath of relief. Alex grabbed the microphone. Yes, we copy. This is an emergency broadcast from... He looked at me, unsure how to explain our situation. I took the mic from him. "This is Michael Gonzalez broadcasting from a government facility beneath Evergreen National Forest. We have a code black situation. I repeat, code black. There is an imminent threat to national security emerging from underground. We need immediate military intervention." There was a long pause. Then the voice came back, sounding skeptical. "Sir, this channel is for emergency communications only. If this is some kind of prank..." "This is not a prank," I shouted into the mic. "Look, I know how this sounds, but you have to listen. There's an underground ecosystem of hostile alien life forms about to break through to the surface. You need to evacuate the area and contact the military immediately." Another long pause. When the voice returned, it was different, older, more authoritative. "This is Chief Ranger Hawkins. Son, I need you to calm down and tell me exactly where you are." I took a deep breath, then gave him as precise a location as I could based on Dr. Blackwood's map. "Please," I added, "you have to hurry. I don't know how much time we have." "We're sending a team to your location now," Hawkins replied. "Stay where you are," and suddenly the radio erupted in a burst of static, then went dead. At the same moment, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. "What happened?" Sophia asked, her voice tight with fear. Before anyone could answer, we felt a tremor run through the building. It started as a low rumble but quickly intensified, causing dust and debris to rain down from the ceiling. "It's that thing," I said, my mouth dry with fear. "It must be getting close to the surface. We're running out of time." We stumbled out of the communications room, using the light from our phones to navigate. The tremors were getting stronger, and I could hear the sound of metal groaning and concrete cracking. "We need to get out of here," Nate said urgently. "This whole place is going to come down on our heads." But as we reached the reception area, we found our exit blocked. The door we'd come through was jammed, warped by the shifting of the building's foundation. "There has to be another way out," Alex said, his voice rising in panic. "Stairs, an elevator, something." We split up, searching frantically for any sign of an escape route. It was Sophia who found it, a heavy metal door marked Emergency Exit, hidden behind a fallen filing cabinet. Together we managed to push the cabinet aside and force the door open. Beyond it was a narrow stairwell leading upwards. "This must go to the surface," I said, hope rising in my chest. "Come on." We started up the stairs, the tremors growing stronger with each step. The stairwell seemed to go on forever, winding upwards in a dizzying spiral. Our legs burned and our lungs ached, but fear drove us onward. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we reached another door. It was locked, but fueled by desperation, we threw ourselves against it again and again until it finally burst open. We spilled out onto the forest floor, gasping and coughing in the fresh air. We were in a small clearing surrounded by the twisted, alien-looking trees we'd seen earlier. In the distance, I could hear the sound of helicopters approaching, but our relief was short-lived. The ground beneath our feet heaved, and with a sound like the world splitting apart, a massive shape erupted from the earth just yards away from us. It was the creature we'd seen on the security monitors, but seeing it in person was a whole different level of terror. It was enormous, its writhing mass of tentacles and mouths stretching hundreds of feet into the air. Its countless eyes swiveled in all directions, taking in the world it had just entered. As we stood there, paralyzed with fear, I saw military helicopters appearing on the horizon. But I knew with a sinking feeling in my gut that they were too late. This thing, this alien god or whatever it was already free. In that moment, as the creature let out a roar that shook the very air around us, I realized that our ordeal in the forest had been just the beginning. The real nightmare was only just starting, and it would engulf not just us, but the entire world. The helicopters opened fire, missiles streaking towards the massive creature, but they seemed to have little effect, exploding harmlessly against its writhing form. As chaos erupted around us, with more of the underground creatures emerging to defend their leader, I grabbed my friends and pulled them towards the cover of the trees. "We have to keep moving," I shouted over the din of battle. "We have to find a way to stop this thing." And so we ran, deeper into the twisted forest, as behind us the fate of the world hung in the balance. Our camping trip had turned into a fight for survival, not just for us, but for all of humanity. As we disappeared into the alien landscape, I couldn't help but wonder, would we find a way to end this nightmare, or had we just witnessed the beginning of the end? We ran through the twisted forest, the sounds of battle fading behind us. The alien vegetation seemed to close in around us, pulsing with an eerie bioluminescence that cast everything in a sickly green glow. It was like running through a fever dream, reality warped and distorted at every turn. "Where are we going?" Sophia gasped as we paused to catch our breath. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. The terror and adrenaline were making it hard to think straight. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we can't just run away. We need to find a way to stop that thing." "How?" Alex demanded, his voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. "Did you see the size of it? The military couldn't even scratch it." I was about to respond when Nate held up a hand, silencing us. "Listen," he whispered. We all fell quiet, straining our ears. At first, all I could hear was the strange alien sounds of the forest around us, but then I caught it, a low pulsing hum, almost more felt than heard. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the forest. "What is that?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, "but I think we should find out. It might be our only chance." Reluctantly, the others agreed. We set off towards the source of the sound, moving as quietly as we could through the underbrush. As we got closer, the humming grew louder, and I began to feel a strange tingling sensation all over my body. Finally, we emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood a structure unlike anything we'd seen in the alien city. It was a perfect sphere, about the size of a house, hovering a few feet off the ground. Its surface was smooth and featureless, pulsing with the same green light as the surrounding vegetation. "What is it?" Alex breathed, staring at the sphere in awe. Before anyone could answer, a section of the sphere's surface rippled and opened, revealing a dark interior. A voice spoke, not in sound, but directly in our minds. "Enter, humans. We have been waiting for you." We all jumped, looking at each other in shock. "Did you hear that?" Sophia asked, her eyes wide. I nodded, my mouth dry. I think it wants us to go inside." "Are you crazy?" Alex hissed. "We have no idea what that thing is." "No," I agreed, "but we're out of options. Whatever this is, it might be our only chance to stop what's happening." After a moment of hesitation, we stepped forward. As we entered the sphere, the opening closed behind us, sealing us in darkness. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm me. Then slowly a soft light began to glow around us. We found ourselves in a circular room, the walls covered in what looked like living circuitry. In the center was a pool of swirling opalescent liquid. As we watched, a form rose from the pool, a being of pure energy, vaguely humanoid in shape but constantly shifting and changing. "Welcome," the being said, again speaking directly into our minds. "We are the Guardians. We have waited long for this moment." What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. "We are the original inhabitants of this world," the Guardian replied. "Long ago we transcended physical form and retreated below the surface, leaving the world above to the younger races. We have watched and waited, intervening only when necessary to maintain the balance." "The balance?" Nate asked, confusion evident in his voice. "The balance between the world above and the world below," the Guardian explained. "The creatures you have encountered are a result of our last intervention, an attempt to create a bridge between our two worlds, but they have grown beyond our control, threatening both realms." "That giant thing," Sophia said, "the one that broke through to the surface. Is that what you mean?" The Guardian's form rippled, a sense of sadness emanating from it. "Yes, it was meant to be a guardian, a protector, but it has been corrupted, twisted by the very energies it was meant to control. Now it seeks only to consume and destroy." "How do we stop it?" I asked, a glimmer of hope rising in my chest. "You cannot," the Guardian said simply. "Not as you are, but we can give you the power to face it, to become guardians yourselves." The implications of what the being was saying hit me like a physical blow. "You want us to change, to become like you?" "It is the only way," the Guardian replied. "But the choice must be yours. The transformation is permanent and the responsibility great. You will leave behind your old lives, your human existence, but you will have the power to save your world and to maintain the balance for generations to come." I looked at my friends, seeing the same mix of fear, uncertainty, and determination on their faces that I felt myself. We had come into these woods for a simple camping trip, and now we were being asked to give up our humanity to save the world. "What if we refuse?" Alex asked, his voice shaking. "Then the world as you know it will end," the Guardian said simply. "The barrier between above and below will crumble, and chaos will reign." I took a deep breath, looking each of my friends in the eye. We didn't need to speak. I could see the decision in their faces. We had come too far, seen too much to turn back now. "We'll do it," I said, turning back to the Guardian. "Tell us what we need to do." The being's form brightened, a sense of approval washing over us. "Step into the pool," it instructed. "Let the energies of the earth flow through you. Embrace your new existence." Hand in hand, we stepped forward. As we entered the swirling liquid, I felt a surge of energy unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My body tingled, then began to dissolve, my consciousness expanding to fill the space around me. I could feel the others beside me, our minds merging, becoming something greater than the sum of our parts. In that moment, I understood everything, the delicate balance of the world, the true nature of the threat we faced, and the power we now wielded to stop it. As our transformation completed, we rose from the pool, no longer human but something far beyond. Energy crackled around us as we emerged from the sphere, our new forms radiating power. In the distance, we could see the corrupted Guardian, still battling the human military forces. But now we knew we could face it. We could restore the balance. As we rose into the air, preparing for the final confrontation, I spared a last thought for the lives we were leaving behind. Our camping trip had led us on an unimaginable journey, from everyday humans to the guardians of two worlds. The battle ahead would be unlike anything we had ever faced. But as we soared towards our destiny, I felt a sense of peace. Whatever happened next, we were ready. The nightmare in Evergreen National Forest had forged us into something new, something powerful. And as the corrupted Guardian turned to face us, its countless eyes widening in recognition and fear, I knew that our true story was only just beginning. Years have passed since that fateful day in Evergreen National Forest. The world above goes on, largely unaware of how close it came to destruction or of the constant vigil we now keep. Sometimes on quiet nights I find myself looking up at the stars, remembering the feel of the wind on my face, the taste of food, the simple joys of human life. But then I feel the pulse of the earth beneath me, sense the delicate balance we maintain between the world above and the world below, and I know we made the right choice. The corrupted guardian is gone, its energies dispersed and purified. The underground city has been sealed off, its inhabitants return to their proper place in the ecosystem. And we, the new guardians, watch over it all. Sophia, Nate, Alex, and I, we're not the people we once were. Our forms shift and change as needed, our consciousnesses expanded beyond what any human could comprehend. But at our core, we remember. We remember who we were and why we chose this path. Sometimes I wonder about the people we left behind, our families, our friends, the lives we were living before that camping trip changed everything. I hope they're at peace, that they've found some way to move on from our disappearance. As for Dr. Blackwood, we found his final resting place deep in the caverns. We laid him to rest properly, honoring the man who first uncovered the truth, even if he couldn't fully understand it. His journal remains with us, a reminder of where our journey began. The government facility has been dismantled, all traces of its existence erased. The few humans who know the truth have been sworn to secrecy. It's better this way, we've decided. The world isn't ready for the knowledge of what lies beneath, but we're here, always watching, always guarding, and if the day ever comes when the balance is threatened again, we'll be ready. So if you ever find yourself in Evergreen National Forest and you feel a strange energy in the air, or catch a glimpse of something that shouldn't be possible, know that you're not alone. We're there, in the shadows, in the whisper of the wind through the trees, the guardians of whispering pines keeping watch over two worlds. Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. I always thought Oakwood Grove National Forest was my sanctuary, a place where the chaotic noise of the world fell silent, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the whisper of the wind. I'd spent the better part of 2 decades as a park ranger, patrolling the remote expanses of this wilderness that few had the patience or desire to explore. The deeper you went, the more the forest seemed to close in on itself, swallowing trails and landmarks as if it wanted to keep its secrets hidden. My name is Alex Thornton, and I've called these woods home since I was fresh out of college, eager to escape the confines of city life and immerse myself in nature. Now, at 43, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The forest had become a part of me, its rhythms as familiar as my own heartbeat. It was late October 2019. The weather had turned crisp, and the trees were a kaleidoscope of orange and red. The season brought a wave of visitors eager to capture the last vestiges of autumn before winter cloaked the land in snow. But the numbers dwindled as the days grew shorter, and by the end of the month the park was nearly empty, save for the occasional hiker or hunter. I was on a routine patrol when I first heard about the missing girl. The call came over my radio just as I was finishing up my rounds near Whispering Pines Campground, a popular spot for weekend warriors looking to get a taste of the great outdoors without venturing too far from civilization. "Alex, you there?" The voice belonged to Sarah Martinez, one of our newer rangers. She'd only been with us for a year, but she'd already proven herself to be sharp and reliable. "Go ahead, Sarah," I responded, my breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. "We've got a situation. A group of campers just reported their friend missing. She went for a hike yesterday afternoon and never came back." I felt a knot form in my stomach. In my years at Oakwood Grove, we'd had our share of lost hikers, but something in Sarah's voice told me this was different. "I'm on my way back to HQ now," I said, already turning towards my truck. "Fill me in on the details." As I drove back to the ranger station, Sarah briefed me on what we knew. The missing girl's name was Lily Chen, a 21-year-old college student who had come to the park with a group of friends for a weekend of camping. They'd set up at Whispering Pines, a safe, well-trodden spot where you could still see the glow of other campfires in the distance. Lily had wandered off on her own one afternoon, probably looking to take some pictures or enjoy the solitude, but she never came back. Her friends searched for her, shouting her name until their voices were hoarse, but there was no sign of her. By the time they reported her missing to the park headquarters, night had already fallen, and the search was delayed until morning. I pulled into the parking lot of our small ranger station, a rustic log cabin that had stood watch over Oakwood Grove for nearly a century. As I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. Sarah was there, along with our chief ranger, Frank Delgado, and a group of 4 young people who looked like they hadn't slept in days. One of them, a tall young man with dark hair and red-rimmed eyes, stood up as I entered. "Are you in charge here?" he asked, his voice strained with worry and fatigue. I shook my head. "That would be Chief Delgado," I said, nodding towards Frank. "I'm Ranger Thornton. I'll be helping with the search." Frank motioned for me to join them at the large map of Oakwood Grove spread out on the table. "Alex, this is Jason, Mia, Dev, and Zoe," he said, indicating each of the young people in turn. "They're Lily's friends." I nodded to each of them, noting the fear and guilt etched on their faces. They were young, barely out of their teens, and clearly shaken. Jason, the one who had spoken to me, kept repeating how they should have stayed together, how it was his fault for letting Lily go off alone. "Did she mention where she was going?" I asked, jotting down notes in my weathered notebook. Jason shook his head. "No, she just said she wanted to explore a bit, take some pictures. We thought she'd be back in an hour or so." The others nodded, their expressions a mix of guilt and fear. They weren't the first to lose someone in Oakwood Grove. The park had a reputation not widely known, but whispered among locals. People went missing here. It didn't happen often, but when it did, they were rarely found. The ones who were, well, they came back different, if they came back at all. I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. "All right," I said, turning to Frank. "What's our plan?" Frank pointed to the map. "We'll start at first light, 2 teams, one heading east from the campsite, the other west. We'll comb through in a grid pattern, focusing on the areas within a 5-mile radius of where Lily was last seen." I nodded, already mentally preparing for what would likely be a long and grueling search. As I looked at the worried faces of Lily's friends, I felt a renewed sense of determination. We would find her. We had to. Little did I know that this search would lead us down a path darker and more terrifying than anything I had encountered in my years at Oakwood Grove. The forest I thought I knew so well was about to reveal its deepest, most chilling secrets. The next morning dawned cold and gray, a thin mist clinging to the trees like a shroud. I arrived at the ranger station just as the first hints of light were creeping over the horizon. The parking lot was already full, a mix of our own rangers and volunteers from the nearby town of Millbrook. Frank was there, looking like he hadn't slept a wink. He probably hadn't. Missing person cases always hit him hard, especially when they involved young people. "Morning, Alex," he said, his voice gruff with fatigue. "Ready to head out?" I nodded, double-checking my pack. Water, first aid kit, emergency rations, flares, everything I might need for a long day in the woods. "Any updates?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Frank shook his head. "Nothing. Lily's friend stayed at the campsite all night, hoping she might find her way back. No luck." I felt a twinge of unease. In my experience, if a lost hiker didn't turn up within the first 24 hours, the chances of finding them alive dropped dramatically. But I pushed that thought aside. We had work to do. We gathered everyone together for a briefing. There were about 20 of us in total, a mix of experienced rangers and local volunteers who knew the area well. Frank laid out the plan, dividing us into 2 teams. I would lead one group east from the campsite, while Sarah took the other west. "Remember," Frank said, his voice carrying across the quiet morning, "we're looking for any sign of Lily. Footprints, pieces of clothing, anything out of place. If you find something, radio in immediately. Don't try to investigate on your own." There was a murmur of agreement, and then we were off, piling into our trucks for the short drive to Whispering Pines campground. As we drove, I couldn't shake a feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. Something about this case felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on why. We arrived at the campsite just as the mist was starting to burn off. Lily's friends were there, looking even more haggard than they had the night before. Jason approached me as I got out of the truck. "Any news?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I shook my head. "Not yet, but we're just getting started. Can you show me exactly where you last saw Lily?" Jason led me to a spot at the edge of the campsite. There was a small trail leading into the woods, barely more than a game path. She went that way, he said, pointing. Said she wanted to get some pictures of the fall colors. I nodded, making a mental note. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. All right, we'll focus our search in that direction. You and your friends should stay here in case she comes back. Jason looked like he wanted to argue, to insist on joining the search, but he just nodded wearily. I could see the toll the last day had taken on him, on all of them. I gathered my team and we set off into the woods, spreading out in a line about 10 feet apart. The forest was quiet, eerily so. Usually, even in late autumn, you'd hear birds calling, small animals scurrying through the underbrush. But today there was nothing but the sound of our own footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves. We searched for hours, methodically covering ground, calling Lily's name every few minutes. But as the day wore on, we found nothing. No footprints, no scraps of clothing, not even a broken twig that might indicate someone had passed through recently. It was as if Lily had simply vanished into thin air. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I called a halt. We'd been searching for nearly 12 hours and fatigue was setting in. Pushing on in the dark would be dangerous and likely fruitless. We made our way back to the campsite, where Sarah's team was also returning. The look on her face told me they'd had no more luck than we had. Lily's friends were still there, huddled around a small campfire. The hope that had been in their eyes that morning was fading, replaced by a growing despair. I approached them, dreading the conversation I was about to have. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice low. "We didn't find anything today, but we're not giving up. We'll be back out at first light tomorrow." Jason looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "She's still out there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She has to be." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to reassure them, to tell them that we'd find Lily safe and sound, but I'd been a ranger long enough to know better than to make promises I couldn't keep. As I turned to leave, Mia, one of the other friends, spoke up. "There's something else," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something we didn't mention before." I turned back, my interest piqued. "What is it?" Mia glanced at the others as if seeking permission. They nodded, and she continued. "The day before Lily disappeared, we saw someone, a man, out in the woods." "That's not unusual," I said. "Lots of hikers and campers come through here." "No, this was different," Mia insisted. "He was strange, dirty, like he'd been living out here. And the way he looked at us, it was creepy." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "Can you describe him?" Mia nodded. Tall, skinny, long, greasy hair. And his face, it just didn't look right, like he'd been out here too long, you know. I did know. Oakwood Grove attracted its share of drifters and loners, people who preferred the company of trees to that of other humans. Most of them were harmless, but there were stories. Stories of those who'd gone mad from the isolation, who'd turned feral, dangerous. "Why didn't you mention this before?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "We didn't think it was important," Jason said. "Lots of weird people come through here, and we didn't see him again after that first time." I nodded, making a mental note to inform Frank about this new development. It might be nothing, but in a case like this, every detail mattered. "All right," I said. "Thank you for telling me. If you remember anything else, anything at all, let us know immediately." As I walked back to my truck, my mind was racing. The strange man might have nothing to do with Lily's disappearance, but my instincts were screaming that there was a connection. And in all my years as a ranger, I'd learned to trust my instincts. I radioed Frank, filling him in on what Lily's friends had told me. He agreed that it was worth looking into and said he'd contact the local sheriff's office to see if they had any information on drifters or transients in the area. As I drove back to the ranger station, the forest around me seemed to grow darker, more menacing. The trees that had always been a source of comfort now felt like they were hiding secrets, concealing dangers I couldn't begin to understand. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in these woods, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to Lily Chen, it was just the beginning of something much darker and more terrifying than anything Oakwood Grove had seen before. The next few days passed in a blur of exhaustive searches and growing frustration. We expanded our search area, bringing in more volunteers and even a team with search dogs. But it was as if Lily Chen had simply ceased to exist. There was no trace of her, no clue as to where she might have gone. The atmosphere in Oakwood Grove had changed. The usual peace and tranquility of the forest had been replaced by a palpable tension. Even the most experienced rangers among us were on edge, jumping at shadows and unexpected sounds. It was on the fourth night of the search that things took a turn for the truly bizarre. I was at the makeshift command center we'd set up near Whispering Pines, poring over maps and trying to figure out where we might have missed something. The night was unusually still, the silence broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of leaves in a faint breeze. Suddenly Jason burst into the tent, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and hope. "I heard her," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "I heard Lily." I was on my feet in an instant. "Where? When?" "Just now," he said, pointing towards the dense woods to the east of the campsite. "It was faint, but I'm sure it was her voice. She was calling for help." I grabbed my gear and radioed for backup. Within minutes, a small team had assembled, and we set off in the direction Jason had indicated. The forest seemed to close in around us as we moved deeper into the woods, the beam of our flashlights barely penetrating the thick canopy above. We called Lily's name, our voices echoing unnaturally in the still night air. But there was no response. After an hour of fruitless searching, I was beginning to think that Jason's mind had been playing tricks on him. The stress and lack of sleep could easily lead to auditory hallucinations. But then I heard it too. A faint sound, barely audible over the rustle of leaves. It sounded like a voice, but it was unlike any human voice I'd ever heard. It was high-pitched, almost keening, and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my hand instinctively going to the hunting knife at my belt. The others nodded, their faces pale in the harsh light of the flashlights. We stood still, straining our ears. The sound came again, louder this time. It was definitely a voice, but the words were indistinct, garbled as if coming from underwater. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. "What the hell was that?" one of the volunteers whispered, his voice shaking. I shook my head, unable to form a coherent response. In all my years in these woods, I'd never experienced anything like this. It was unsettling, to say the least. We continued our search for another hour, but found nothing. No sign of Lily, no source for the strange voice we'd heard. As we made our way back to the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest that had always been my home now felt alien and threatening. Back at the command center, I reported what had happened to Frank. He listened with a frown, his weathered face creased with worry. "I don't like this, Alex," he said when I'd finished. "First the girl disappears without a trace, then this, whatever it was. Something's not right here." I nodded in agreement. "What do you think we should do?" Frank sighed, rubbing his temples. "For now, we keep searching, but I'm going to call in some additional help. This is starting to feel like more than just a missing person case." As I left Frank's office, I saw Lily's friends huddled together near the edge of the campsite. They looked shell-shocked, the hope that had sustained them for the past few days giving way to a growing dread. I approached them, feeling the weight of responsibility heavy on my shoulders. "Any news?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "Nothing concrete, but we're not giving up." Jason looked up at me, his eyes haunted. "It's not just Lily, is it? There's something wrong out there." I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal, but these kids had already been through so much. They deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as I could give them. "We're not sure what's going on," I admitted, "but I promise you we're doing everything we can to find Lily and get to the bottom of this." As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a promise I might not be able to keep. The next morning, I woke to the sound of unfamiliar voices outside my cabin. Peering out the window, I saw Frank talking to a group of men I didn't recognize. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but something about their bearing screamed law enforcement. I quickly dressed and made my way outside. Frank saw me approaching and waved me over. "Alex," he said, "I'd like you to meet Agent Simmons and his team. They're here to help with the investigation." I shook hands with Simmons, a tall, lean man with close-cropped gray hair and piercing blue eyes. FBI? I asked. Simmons nodded. Special unit. We deal with unusual cases. There was something in the way he said unusual that sent a chill down my spine. I'd always prided myself on being a rational person, someone who dealt in facts and evidence. But the events of the past few days had shaken that belief to its core. What can you tell us about the girl's disappearance? Simmons asked as we walked towards the command center. I filled him in on everything we knew, including the strange encounter Lily's friends had reported and the bizarre noises we'd heard in the woods. Simmons listened intently, his face betraying no emotion. And you've never experienced anything like this before? He asked when I'd finished. I shook my head. Never. Oakwood Grove has always been a peaceful place until now. Simmons nodded as if confirming something to himself. We'll need to speak with the friends again, and I'd like to see where you heard those sounds last night. The rest of the day was a blur of activity. Simmons and his team interviewed everyone involved in the search, pored over our maps, and combed through the area where we'd heard the strange voices. They were thorough and professional, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew more than they were letting on. It was late afternoon when one of the local volunteers, a man named Tom, who'd lived in the area his whole life, approached me with a worried look on his face. "Alex," he said, his voice low, "there's something you should know, something I should have mentioned earlier, but, well, I didn't want to sound crazy." I felt my stomach tighten. "What is it, Tom?" He glanced around as if afraid of being overheard. "You remember that story about the hermit, the one who supposedly lived deep in the woods?" I nodded. It was an old local legend, one I'd always dismissed as campfire talk. The story went that decades ago, a man had gone into the deepest part of Oakwood Grove and never come out. Over the years, hikers claimed to have seen him, describing a wild-looking man with long hair and tattered clothes. "What about it?" I asked. Tom swallowed hard. "I think I saw him, about a week before the girl went missing. I was out checking my traps, and I saw this figure. At first I thought it was just a shadow, but then it moved. It was a man, Alex, but not like any man I've ever seen. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes, God, his eyes were like nothing I've ever seen before." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why didn't you report this?" Tom shook his head. "Who'd believe me? Hell, I barely believed it myself. But after what's been happening, I thought you should know." I thanked Tom for the information and immediately went to find Simmons. The agent listened to my report with the same impassive expression he'd worn all day. "We'll look into it," he said when I'd finished. "In the meantime, I want you to double the patrols. No one goes into the woods alone, understood?" I nodded, feeling a mix of relief that someone was taking charge and frustration at being sidelined in my own forest. As night fell, an uneasy quiet settled over Oakwood Grove. The search teams had returned, tired and discouraged. Lily's friends sat around a campfire, their faces drawn and hopeless. I wanted to offer them some words of comfort, but what could I say? That we were now chasing ghost stories and campfire legends? I was making my final rounds when I heard it again, that same eerie, inhuman voice echoing through the trees. But this time it was closer, much closer. I switched off my flashlight and stood perfectly still, straining my ears. The voice was clearer now, and I could almost make out words. It sounded like singing, a high, keening melody that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And then I saw it. A figure moving through the trees about 50 yards away. It was tall and thin, its movements jerky and unnatural. As it passed through a shaft of moonlight, I caught a glimpse of its face. Tom's description hadn't done it justice. The creature, for I couldn't think of it as a man, had skin that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Its eyes were huge and black, reflecting the moonlight like a cat's. And its mouth? Its mouth was open far too wide, emitting that terrible, beautiful song. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to call for help. The creature turned its head, and for a moment its eyes locked with mine. I felt a wave of cold wash over me, and in that instant I understood why Lily had vanished without a trace, why people went missing in these woods and were never seen again. The thing in the forest wasn't just a hermit or a madman. It was something else entirely. something that didn't belong in our world. As the realization hit me, the creature's song reached a crescendo. The world around me began to blur and shift, the trees seeming to bend and twist in impossible ways. I felt a pulling sensation, as if some invisible force was trying to drag me forward. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I tore my gaze away from those hypnotic eyes and ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop, because I knew that if I did, if I looked back even for a moment, I would be lost. Just like Lily, just like all the others who had vanished in Oakwood Grove over the years. As I burst into the clearing where our command center was set up, I saw Simmons and his team gearing up, their faces grim and determined. They took one look at me and seemed to understand. "You saw it," Simmons said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, still struggling to catch my breath. What is that thing?" Simmons checked his weapon, his face set in hard lines. "Something that doesn't belong here. Something we're going to send back where it came from." As the team moved out into the darkness, I realized that my understanding of the world had changed forever. Oakwood Grove, my sanctuary, my home, would never be the same again. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, that unearthly song continued, calling to something beyond our comprehension. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Simmons and his team moved with practiced efficiency, setting up a perimeter around the area where I'd seen the creature. They brought out equipment I'd never seen before, devices that beeped and whirred, giving off readings that meant nothing to me but seemed to concern the agents deeply. I found myself relegated to the sidelines, my years of experience in these woods suddenly meaningless in the face of whatever we were dealing with. Frank stood beside me, his face ashen in the harsh glare of the floodlights we'd set up. "What the hell is going on, Alex?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I wish I knew, Frank. I really wish I knew." As dawn broke, casting a pale, sickly light over the forest, Simmons approached us. He looked tired, the lines on his face deeper than they had been the day before. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Whatever this thing is, it's not just hiding in the woods anymore, it's changing them." "What do you mean, changing them?" I asked, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. Simmons ran a hand through his hair. "It's hard to explain. The topology of the forest is shifting. Landmarks aren't where they should be. It's like reality itself is bending around this creature." I thought back to the night before, how the trees had seemed to twist and warp as the creature sang. I'd attributed it to fear and adrenaline. But what if it had been real? "What about Lily?" Frank asked. "Is there any chance she's still—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but we all knew what he meant. "Is there any chance she's still alive?" Simmons' face softened slightly. "We don't know. But if she is, our best chance of finding her is to locate the source of these disturbances." "And how do we do that?" I asked. "We go in," Simmons said simply. "A small team moving fast and light. We find the heart of this thing and we end it." I nodded, straightening up. "I'm coming with you." Simmons looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced him. "All right. But you follow my lead, understood? This isn't like anything you've dealt with before." As we prepared for the mission, I couldn't help but think of Lily's friends. They were still here, refusing to leave until they knew what had happened to her. I approached them, feeling the weight of responsibility heavy on my shoulders. "We think we've found a lead," I told them, choosing my words carefully. "We're going in to investigate." Jason stood up, his face set in determination. "We're coming too." I shook my head firmly. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "She's our friend," Mia argued. "We can't just sit here and do nothing." I understood their frustration, their need to act, but I also knew that I couldn't risk any more young lives. "The best thing you can do for Lily right now is stay here and stay safe," I said. "I promise you we're doing everything we can to find her." They didn't look happy, but they nodded reluctantly. As I turned to go, Jason caught my arm. "Bring her back," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Please." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The weight of their hope, their trust, felt almost unbearable. An hour later, our small team was ready to move out. Besides Simmons and myself, there were 2 other agents, a woman named Rodriguez and a man called Chen. They carried an array of equipment I didn't recognize, along with more conventional weapons. As we prepared to enter the woods, Simmons gathered us for a final briefing. "Remember, stick together. The forest isn't behaving normally. If you get separated, you may not be able to find your way back. And whatever you do, if you hear that singing, don't listen. Block it out however you can." We nodded grimly and set off into the trees. Almost immediately I could tell something was wrong. The forest I'd known like the back of my hand for 20 years suddenly felt alien and threatening. Familiar landmarks were missing or in the wrong places. The very air felt thick and heavy, as if we were walking through water instead of air. We'd been walking for what felt like hours, though my watch insisted it had only been 45 minutes, when Rodriguez's equipment began to beep insistently. "We're close," she said, her voice tense. "The readings are off the charts." And then we heard it. That same haunting, inhuman song that had nearly ensnared me the night before. I saw Chen stumble, his eyes going wide and unfocused. "Chen," Simmons barked, "focus!" The agent shook his head as if to clear it, but I could see the strain on his face. Whatever this thing was, its power was growing. We pushed on, the song growing louder with every step. The forest around us was changing more dramatically now. Trees bent at impossible angles, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. The ground beneath our feet shifted and roiled, making every step a challenge. And then suddenly we were there. The heart of the disturbance. A clearing that hadn't existed yesterday, perfectly circular and filled with a swirling, opalescent mist. In the center stood the creature I'd seen the night before, but now I could see it clearly. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with limbs that were too long and jointed in the wrong places. Its skin was pale and seemed to shift and ripple, as if it wasn't quite solid. But it was the face that drew the eye and chilled the soul, those huge black eyes that seemed to contain entire universes, and that mouth, open impossibly wide, from which poured that terrible, beautiful song. For a moment we all stood frozen, caught between awe and terror. Then Simmons snapped into action. "Now!" he shouted, and Rodriguez and Chen began setting up their equipment, their movements quick and practiced. The creature turned towards us, its song changing in tone. I felt a wave of something wash over me. Not quite sound, not quite emotion, but a force that threatened to overwhelm my senses. "Alex," Simmons' voice cut through the haze, "we need to hold it off while they work. Whatever you do, don't let it touch you." I nodded, drawing my hunting knife. It felt pitifully inadequate against this otherworldly threat, but it was all I had. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic action. Simmons and I darted around the clearing, keeping the creature's attention divided while Rodriguez and Chen worked on whatever it was they were doing. The air crackled with energy, and I could feel reality itself groaning under the strain. And then, in a lull in the chaos, I saw her, Lily. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, her eyes wide and unfocused. She took a step towards the creature, her movements jerky and unnatural. "Lily!" I shouted. "Lily, stop!" For a moment, just a moment, I saw recognition flicker in her eyes. Then the creature's song swelled, and she continued her slow, inexorable march towards it. I didn't think, I just acted. I ran towards Lily, knowing that I was putting myself directly in the creature's path. I could hear Simmons shouting something, but the words were lost in the overwhelming song. Just as I reached Lily, just as my hand closed around her arm, I felt something cold and alien brush against my back. The world exploded into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and sounds. I felt myself falling through space and time, through realities I couldn't begin to comprehend. And then, darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally came to, I found myself lying on a hospital bed, the steady beep of a heart monitor filling the room. My whole body ached, and my head felt like it was stuffed with cotton. As my vision cleared, I saw Frank sitting in a chair beside the bed. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, deep lines etched into his face. "Welcome back," he said, his voice rough with emotion. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. Frank helped me sip some water before I tried again. "Lily?" I managed to croak out. Frank's face broke into a tired smile. "She's alive. You saved her, Alex. She's in the hospital too, but the doctors say she'll make a full recovery. Relief washed over me, so intense it was almost painful. But as the fog in my mind began to clear, other questions arose. The creature? I asked. What happened? Frank's expression grew serious. It's complicated. Simmons and his team managed to close whatever portal that thing came through. They used some kind of advanced technology I don't pretend to understand. The creature, well, they say it's gone. Back to wherever it came from. I nodded slowly, trying to process this information. And the forest? Frank sighed. It's still there, but it's different. The areas closest to where we found you and Lily are off limits now. The official story is environmental contamination, but... He trailed off, shaking his head. I understood. How could we explain what had really happened? Who would believe us? How long was I out? I asked, suddenly realizing I had no idea what day it was. 3 weeks, Frank replied, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. The doctors, well, they weren't sure you were going to wake up at all. I lay back, trying to absorb this. 3 weeks. It felt like only moments had passed since I'd reached for Lily in that impossible clearing. Lily's friends? I asked, remembering the promise I'd made to them. They're okay, Frank assured me. They've been here every day, checking on both you and Lily. They're good kids. Over the next few days, as I regained my strength, I learned more about what had happened. The official report was vague, full of bureaucratic language that said nothing while implying everything. Terms like unexplained phenomenon and temporary spatial anomaly were used liberally. Simmons visited me once, the day before I was discharged. He looked tired but satisfied. You did good out there, Thornton, he said. Not many people could have done what you did. And what exactly did I do? I asked. My memories of those final moments in the clearing were hazy at best. Simmons smiled slightly. You broke its hold on the girl, brought her back. Not many people can resist that kind of influence. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I fully understood. What was it? Where did it come from? Simmons's expression turned serious. There are things out there, Thornton. Things that exist in the spaces between what we know. Sometimes they find their way through. Our job is to make sure they don't stay. He left soon after, leaving me with more questions than answers, but I knew better than to push. Some things, perhaps, were better left unknown. A week after I was discharged, I returned to Oakwood Grove. The forest looked the same at first glance, but as I walked the familiar trails, I could feel the difference. There was a tension in the air, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. The trees seemed to whisper secrets to each other as I passed. I found myself at the edge of the quarantine zone, staring into the depths of the forest that had once been my second home. Yellow tape and warning signs marked the boundary, but they seemed almost laughably inadequate, given what lay beyond. I wouldn't go in there if I were you, a voice said behind me. I turned to see Lily, looking pale but determined. Her friend stood a respectful distance away, watching us with concerned expressions. I wasn't planning to, I assured her. How are you feeling? She shrugged, her eyes never leaving the forest. Physically, fine. The doctors say there's nothing wrong with me, but... She trailed off, and I saw a shadow pass over her face. You remember, I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. Not everything, but enough. That song. I can still hear it sometimes in my dreams. I put a hand on her shoulder, feeling a surge of protectiveness. It's over now. It can't hurt you anymore. Lily turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. Is it? Is it really over? I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that the danger had passed, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. I don't know, I admitted, but if it ever comes back, we'll be ready. She nodded, seeming to accept this. After a moment, she spoke again. I'm leaving, you know, my friends and I. We're going back home. I nodded, understanding. How could they stay, knowing what lurked in the shadows of Oakwood Grove? What about you? Lily asked. Will you stay? I looked back at the forest, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. Someone needed to stand guard, to watch for signs that the barrier between worlds was thinning again. Yes, I said. I'll stay. Lily smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. Good. The forest needs you, I think. As she walked back to her friends, I turned once more to face the woods. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, looking for all the world like any other forest. But I knew better now. I knew the secrets that lay hidden in the heart of Oakwood Grove, and I would be here, watching, waiting, ready to face whatever might come through from the other side. Because some sanctuaries, I had learned, needed guardians, and Oakwood Grove, for better or worse, was mine. Years have passed since that fateful autumn when Lily Chen disappeared, and the fabric of reality tore open in the heart of Oakwood Grove. The forest has healed, at least on the surface. To the casual observer, it looks much as it always has, a vast expanse of green, teeming with life and natural beauty. But those of us who know the truth see it differently now. We see the scars hidden beneath the new growth, the subtle wrongness in the way certain trees grow, or the paths that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. I'm still here, older now, my hair grayed and my face lined with the weight of the secrets I carry. I've become something of a legend among the younger rangers and the locals in town. They call me the guardian of Oakwood Grove, though few know the real reason why. Lily visits sometimes, usually in the autumn when the leaves are turning and the air carries a hint of otherworldly chill. She's doing well, married now, with a successful career and a life far removed from the horrors she experienced here. But I can see it in her eyes when she looks into the depths of the forest. The memory of that haunting song, the pull of something beyond our world. Simmons and his team check in periodically, running tests and taking readings with equipment I still don't understand. They say everything's normal, that the breach has been fully sealed. But I notice the way their hands sometimes shake, the way they flinch at unexpected sounds from the forest. As for me, I patrol the woods every day, my senses attuned to the slightest change, the faintest echo of that unearthly song. Most days all is quiet, but sometimes when the wind is just right and the shadows grow long, I think I hear it, a distant melody, beautiful and terrible, calling from somewhere beyond the veil of our reality. On those days I stand at the edge of the quarantine zone, my hand on the worn grip of my hunting knife, and I remember the promise I made, to Lily, to the forest, to myself. I am the guardian of Oakwood Grove, and I will be ready should the darkness ever return. Because some stories don't end, some songs never truly fade, and in the heart of every sanctuary, there are secrets waiting to be discovered or unleashed. Hey everyone, I'm curious. Where are you all tuning in from? It would be great to hear a bit about the different places our community is connecting from around the world. Share where you're watching from and maybe a fun fact about your local area. I'm always excited to learn more about the amazing people who support us. Can't wait to hear your stories. Best regards. My name is Ethan Callahan, and this is a story I've kept buried for decades. It all began in the autumn of 1998 in the small town of Millbrook, Ohio. I was 32 then, working a mind-numbing job at the local paper mill. My life was a monotonous cycle of early mornings, long shifts, and quiet evenings spent in front of the TV. I lived in a modest ranch-style house on Maple Street, where the only excitement came from my Friday night beers with my next-door neighbor, Frank Donovan. Frank was a jovial man in his mid-40s with a booming laugh and a penchant for wild stories. He worked as a mechanic at the local garage and always smelled faintly of motor oil. We'd sit on my porch nursing cold beers and watching the world go by, complaining about our jobs and dreaming of better days. One particularly crisp Friday evening in late September, Frank showed up at my door with a glint in his eye that I'd come to recognize as trouble. "Ethan, my boy," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "I've got an idea that'll knock your socks off." I raised an eyebrow, already wary. "Oh yeah? What's that, Frank?" He leaned in conspiratorially. "How about we take a little trip up to Hocking Hills this weekend? My brother-in-law's got a cabin up there, prime fishing, cold beer, and not a paper mill in sight for miles." Now, I wasn't much for the outdoors. My idea of roughing it was a motel without cable, but something in Frank's enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself nodding along. "You know what? Why not?" I said, surprising myself. "God knows I could use a break from this place." Frank's face split into a wide grin. "That's the spirit. We'll leave tomorrow morning. Pack light, but don't forget your fishing rod." The next day, we set off in Frank's beat-up Ford pickup. The truck bed was loaded with fishing gear, a cooler full of beer and sandwiches, and enough snacks to feed a small army. As we left Millbrook behind, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The monotony of my daily life faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the promise of adventure. The drive to Hocking Hills took about 3 hours, filled with easy conversation and the sounds of classic rock from Frank's old cassette player. We talked about everything and nothing: old high school stories, the latest town gossip, our dreams of winning the lottery and leaving our dead-end jobs behind. We arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The cabin was a rustic 2-story affair, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering oak and maple trees. A small lake glimmered in the distance, promising good fishing. Frank's brother-in-law had left the key under a flower pot by the front door, just as he'd promised. We unlocked the cabin and stepped inside, greeted by the musty smell of disuse and the lingering scent of pine. "Home sweet home," Frank declared, dropping his bag on the worn wooden floor. "What do you say we crack open a couple of cold ones and plan our fishing strategy for tomorrow?" I couldn't argue with that logic. We spent the evening on the cabin's small porch, drinking beer and watching the stars come out one by one. The night was filled with the sounds of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. The next morning we were up at dawn, eager to try our luck on the lake. The air was crisp and cool, a light mist hanging over the water. We loaded up the small rowboat tied to the dock and pushed off, the only sound the gentle splash of our oars in the still water. Hours passed as we fished, catching a few decent-sized bass and perch. But more than the fish, I found myself enjoying the quiet. There were no machines humming, no phones ringing, no demands on my time or attention. Just the gentle lapping of water against the boat and the occasional plop of a fish jumping nearby. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Frank suggested we head back to shore and explore the surrounding woods. "I could use a good stretch," he said, reeling in his line. "Besides, who knows what we might find out there?" I agreed, my legs stiff from sitting in the boat for so long. We rowed back to the dock, secured the boat, and set off into the woods, following a narrow, overgrown trail that led away from the cabin. The forest was dense, the canopy overhead blocking out much of the sunlight. The air felt cooler here, and I found myself pulling my jacket tighter around me. As we walked, Frank regaled me with stories of the creatures that supposedly lurked in these woods, everything from black bears to the legendary Bigfoot. "You don't really believe in that stuff, do you?" I asked, chuckling. Frank shrugged, a mischievous glint in his eye. "You never know what's out there, Ethan. These woods are old. They've got secrets." I was about to respond when something caught my eye. There, in a patch of soft earth near the base of a large oak tree, was a set of tracks unlike anything I'd ever seen before. "Frank," I called out, my voice hushed, "come look at this." Frank backtracked to where I was standing, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" I pointed to the tracks. They were large, much larger than a human footprint, with distinct claw marks at the end of each toe. But they weren't bear tracks. I'd seen those before on a camping trip years ago. These were different. They were elongated, almost human-like in shape, but far too big and with those wicked-looking claws. Frank crouched down, studying the prints intently. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "What do you think made these?" I shook my head, a chill running down my spine despite the warmth of the afternoon. "I have no idea, but whatever it is, it's big." We stood there for a long moment, staring at the tracks. The woods suddenly seemed darker, more ominous. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made us jump. "Maybe we should head back to the cabin," I suggested, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. Frank nodded, his earlier bravado subdued. "Yeah, that might be a good idea." We made our way back to the cabin in silence, both lost in our thoughts. As we emerged from the tree line, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced back at the woods, half expecting to see a pair of eyes gleaming in the shadows. But there was nothing. That night, as we sat around the fireplace inside the cabin, the mood was subdued. We tried to laugh off our unease, joking about the Millbrook monster we'd discovered, but our hearts weren't in it. Every so often one of us would glance out the window into the darkness beyond. It was just after midnight when we heard it. A long, low howl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote. It was deeper, more guttural, and filled with an almost human-like anguish. Frank and I looked at each other, our faces pale in the flickering firelight. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Before Frank could answer, we heard it again, closer this time. It was followed by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush, snapping branches and rustling leaves. "We need to get out of here," Frank said, his voice tight with fear. "Now." We scrambled to gather our things, shoving clothes and gear haphazardly into our bags. The noises outside grew louder, punctuated by that bone-chilling howl. Just as we were about to make a break for the truck, there was a tremendous crash against the side of the cabin. The whole structure shook, and I heard the splintering of wood. Something was trying to get in. "The gun!" Frank yelled, pointing to the rifle mounted above the fireplace. "Grab the gun!" I snatched the rifle off its hooks, my hands shaking as I checked to see if it was loaded. It was. Another crash, and this time I saw the wall near the front door buckle inward. In the dim light I caught a glimpse of fur and gleaming claws as whatever was out there tried to force its way inside. Frank had grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace and was standing ready, his face a mask of determination and fear. "When I say go," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, "we make a run for the truck. Don't stop for anything. Got it?" I nodded, gripping the rifle so tight my knuckles were white. The next few moments were a blur of violence and terror. The front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters, and there, filling the doorway, was a creature out of a nightmare. It was massive, standing well over 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick matted fur, but its proportions were all wrong for a bear. It stood on 2 legs, its arms ending in hands tipped with long, cruel claws. But it was the face that would haunt my dreams for years to come. It was a twisted amalgamation of wolf and man, with a long snout filled with razor-sharp teeth and eyes that glowed with an unnatural amber light. For a split second everything was still. The creature's eyes locked with mine, and I saw something there: intelligence, hunger, and a deep primal rage. "Go!" Frank's shout broke the spell. I raised the rifle and fired, the report deafening in the confined space of the cabin. The creature roared in pain and fury as the bullet found its mark, but it didn't go down. Frank and I bolted past it, taking advantage of its momentary distraction. We raced for the truck, the sounds of pursuit close behind us. I reached the passenger side and yanked the door open, practically diving inside. Frank was right behind me, fumbling with his keys. Come on," I yelled as the engine turned over once, twice, before finally roaring to life. Frank slammed the truck into gear and we peeled out, tires spinning in the dirt before finding purchase. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature emerge from the cabin, its eyes reflecting the taillights like twin points of hellfire. We tore down the dirt road leading away from the cabin, the truck bouncing and shuddering over the uneven ground. Neither of us spoke, too focused on putting as much distance between us and that thing as possible. It wasn't until we reached the main highway that we finally began to relax. Frank's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I realized I was still clutching the rifle, my finger on the trigger. What the hell was that?" I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. Frank shook his head, his eyes never leaving the road. "I don't know, Ethan. I don't know." We drove straight through the night, not stopping until we reached Millbrook. As we pulled up in front of my house, the first light of dawn was just beginning to streak the sky. "What do we do now?" I asked as we sat there, the engine idling. Frank was quiet for a long moment. "We don't talk about it," he said finally. "Who'd believe us anyway?" I nodded slowly. He was right. We'd be laughed out of town if we tried to tell anyone what we'd seen. That was 25 years ago. Frank and I kept our word. We never spoke about that night again, not to each other, not to anyone. But we both changed after that weekend. Frank took a job in Columbus and moved away a few months later. Last I heard, he was working as a long-haul trucker, always on the move. As for me, I quit my job at the paper mill and found work as a night security guard. I couldn't stand the thought of being in the woods after dark anymore. I became a homebody, rarely venturing out after sunset. When I did, I carried a gun, just in case. I've spent countless hours researching, trying to find some explanation for what we encountered that night. I've read about wendigos, skinwalkers, and other creatures from folklore that might fit the bill, but nothing quite matches what we saw. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I think I can hear that howl again, carried on the breeze from some distant dark forest. And I wonder if it's still out there, that creature from the shadows, waiting for some unsuspecting soul to wander into its territory. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that night in Hocking Hills, but I do know this. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the darkness just beyond the reach of our campfires and streetlights. And once you've seen them, you can never unsee them. So if you're ever in the woods and you hear something moving in the underbrush, something too big to be a deer or a bear, don't stick around to investigate. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because you never know what might be hiding in the shadows, waiting to pounce. As for me, I'll stay here in Millbrook, safe behind my locked doors and drawn curtains. But a part of me will always be back in those woods, forever running from the monster with the glowing eyes and reaching claws. And I'll never stop looking over my shoulder, wondering if someday, somehow, it might find me again. For nearly a quarter of a century, I've been the eyes and ears of Whispering Pines National Park. My name is Jack Hawthorne, and for 25 years, I've walked these trails, breathed this air, and listened to the secrets whispered by the towering Douglas firs and western red cedars. This sprawling wilderness in the heart of Oregon has been my home, my sanctuary, and my purpose. I've always felt a deep connection to nature, finding solace in the rustling leaves and the babbling brooks. The forest has been my confidant, my teacher, and my friend. But in the fall of 2018, everything changed. The familiar became foreign, the comforting turned cold, and the whispers of the pines began to sound more like warnings. It was late September when the first chill of autumn crept into the air. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the landscape in a breathtaking array of reds, oranges, and golds. Normally, this was my favorite time of year. The summer crowds had thinned, leaving the park to those who truly appreciated its wild beauty. But this year there was something different in the air, a tension that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath my feet. I remember the day it all began as clearly as if it were yesterday. I was doing my usual rounds, checking the trails for any debris or damage from a recent windstorm. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and decaying leaves. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest seemed quieter than usual, the birds unnaturally silent. That's when I saw her for the last time. Lily Chen was a local artist, known for her stunning watercolor paintings of the park's landscapes. She was a free spirit, always wandering off the beaten path in search of the perfect vista to capture on canvas. I'd seen her around the park countless times over the years, her face serene as she lost herself in her art. "Morning, Ranger Jack," she called out cheerfully as she passed me on the trail. Her backpack was stuffed with art supplies, a canvas peeking out from the top. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I nodded, returning her smile. "It sure is, Lily. Where are you headed today?" She gestured vaguely towards the denser part of the forest. "I heard about a hidden waterfall deep in the Whispering Gorge. Thought I'd try to find it, and maybe get a painting or two out of it." A frown creased my brow. The Whispering Gorge? That's pretty far off the main trails, Lily. It can be dangerous if you don't know the area well. Lily just laughed, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Don't worry about me, Jack. I've got my GPS, plenty of supplies, and years of experience. I'll be fine." I wanted to argue, to insist that she take a guide or at least let someone accompany her. But Lily was an adult, and she knew the risks. I had no authority to stop her, so instead I just nodded and said, "All right, but be careful out there, and make sure you're back before dark." "Will do, Ranger Jack," she called over her shoulder as she set off down the trail. "See you in a few days." I watched her go, a nagging feeling of unease settling in my gut. Little did I know that this would be the last time anyone would see Lily Chen. 3 days passed, and there was no sign of Lily. Her car remained in the visitor parking lot, untouched. On the fourth day, her worried partner called the ranger station, reporting her missing. That's when the search began in earnest. We assembled a team of rangers, local search and rescue volunteers, and even brought in some search dogs. For days we combed through the dense forests of whispering pines, calling Lily's name until our voices were hoarse. We searched every trail, every clearing, every rocky outcropping in the Whispering Gorge and beyond. But it was as if Lily Chen had simply vanished into thin air. There was no trace of her campsite, no discarded art supplies, not even a single footprint. The dogs couldn't pick up her scent. It was as if the forest had swallowed her whole, leaving no evidence behind. As the days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. The official search was called off after 2 weeks, but I couldn't let it go. In my free time, I continued to search, convinced that I must have missed something, some clue that would lead us to Lily. It was during one of these solo searches that I stumbled upon something strange. I was deep in the heart of the Whispering Gorge, in an area so remote that even I, with my decades of experience, had rarely ventured there. The trees grew so thick here that they blotted out much of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. As I pushed through a particularly dense thicket, I suddenly found myself in a clearing. The abrupt transition from the crowded forest to this open space was jarring, but that wasn't what made me stop in my tracks. In the center of the clearing stood a perfect circle of stones. They were smooth and dark, almost like river rocks, but larger. Each was about the size of a man's head, and they were arranged with a precision that spoke of human intervention. But who would come all the way out here to build such a thing? I approached cautiously, my instincts screaming that something wasn't right. As I got closer, I noticed something else. There were symbols carved into each stone. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Not letters or numbers, but intricate swirling designs that seemed to move if I looked at them too long. A chill ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the day. I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched, that the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures of the stone circle and the symbols. Then, fighting against every instinct that was telling me to run, I stepped into the circle. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The air grew cold, and the silence of the forest became absolute. Not a bird chirped, not a leaf rustled. It was as if I had stepped into another world entirely. And then I heard it, a whisper, so faint I wasn't sure if it was real or just my imagination. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a sound that was almost more feeling than noise. "Jack, help me." It was Lily's voice. I spun around, heart pounding, but I was alone in the clearing. "Lily," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the eerie silence. "Lily, where are you?" But there was no answer. The whisper did not come again. Fighting against a rising panic, I stumbled out of the stone circle. As soon as I crossed its boundary, the sounds of the forest rushed back in a cacophony of bird calls and rustling leaves. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I really heard Lily's voice, or was it just my desperate mind playing tricks on me? I looked back at the stone circle, half expecting it to have vanished, but it was still there, silent and ominous. I knew I should report this, tell someone about what I had found. But who would believe me? A magic circle of stones in the middle of nowhere, whispering voices, vanishing hikers. It sounded insane. So I did the only thing I could think of. I marked the location on my GPS and headed back to the ranger station. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. Little did I know this was only the beginning of the strange and terrifying events that would unfold in Whispering Pines. In the weeks following my discovery of the stone circle, I found myself consumed by thoughts of Lily and the strange phenomena I had encountered. I spent my free time researching local legends and folklore, looking for any mention of similar occurrences in the area's history. What I found disturbed me deeply. There were stories, old stories passed down through generations of the indigenous people who had lived in these lands long before it became a national park. They spoke of a malevolent spirit that dwelled in the deepest parts of the forest, a being they called the Shadow Walker. According to the legends, the Shadow Walker was a shapeshifter, able to take on the appearance of animals or even mimic the voices of loved ones. It lured unsuspecting victims deep into the woods, where it would trap their souls in sacred stone circles. I tried to dismiss these stories as mere superstition, but I couldn't shake the memory of Lily's voice whispering from the stones. The rational part of my mind insisted there had to be a logical explanation, but deep down, a seed of doubt had taken root. It was about a month after Lily's disappearance when it happened again. Marcus Reeves was an experienced backpacker, the kind of guy who spent more time in the wilderness than in civilization. He had set out on a week-long solo trek through some of the most remote parts of Whispering Pines. When he didn't return on schedule and failed to check in, his wife raised the alarm. Once again, I found myself leading a search party into the depths of the forest. We retraced Marcus's planned route, checked all the usual spots where hikers might seek shelter or rest. But just like with Lily, there was no trace of him, no campsite, no discarded gear, not even a single boot print. It was as if Marcus Reeves had simply stepped off the face of the earth. The official search was called off after a week, but I couldn't let it go. In my gut, I knew that Marcus's disappearance was connected to Lily's, and to the stone circle I had found. So on my next day off, I headed back into the forest, determined to find the clearing again. It took me hours of hiking, pushing through dense underbrush and scaling steep inclines. The forest seemed to be actively working against me, throwing obstacles in my path at every turn. Finally, just as I was about to give up, I broke through a thick wall of ferns and found myself in the clearing. The stone circle was still there, just as I remembered it, but something had changed. The symbols carved into the stone seemed deeper, more pronounced, and there was something new. A small pile of objects in the center of the circle. Heart-pounding, I approached. There, lying on the bare earth, were a watercolor paintbrush and a high-end hiking boot. I recognized the paintbrush immediately. It was the same type Lily always used. And the boot? It matched the description of the ones Marcus had been wearing when he disappeared. I stood there staring at these objects, my mind reeling. This was proof, undeniable proof that something sinister was happening in these woods. But what? And more importantly, how could I stop it? As these thoughts raced through my mind, I became aware of a sound. At first I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but as I listened more closely, I realized it was something else entirely. Whispers, dozens of them, maybe more. They seemed to be coming from the stones themselves, a chorus of faint, desperate voices calling out for help. Among them, I could clearly make out Lily's voice and another that I assumed must be Marcus. But there were others too, some speaking in languages I didn't understand, some so faint they were barely audible. Panic gripped me. I wanted to run, to flee this cursed place and never return. But I knew I couldn't. Whatever was happening here, whatever force was taking these people, I was the only one who knew about it, the only one who could potentially do something to stop it. With shaking hands, I took out my phone and started recording, capturing the whispers and the strange symbols on the stones. I didn't know if it would be of any use, but I had to try something. As I was recording, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the clearing, cold as midwinter despite the summer heat. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and then cutting through the cacophony, I heard a single, clear voice. "Behind you." I spun around, my heart nearly stopping in my chest. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body a shifting mass of shadows that seemed to blend with the darkness between the trees. Its face, if you could call it that, was a blank void with 2 pinpricks of light where eyes should be. For a long moment we stared at each other, the entity and I. I felt its gaze boring into me, filled with an ancient alien intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. Then, moving with a speed that defied physics, it was suddenly right in front of me. I felt a cold so intense it burned, and the world around me began to fade. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was a voice, my own voice, whispering in my ear, "Welcome to the circle, Jack." I awoke with a start, my heart pounding and my clothes drenched in cold sweat. I was lying on the forest floor, the canopy of trees above me swaying gently in the breeze. For a moment I was disoriented, unsure of where I was or how I had gotten there. Then it all came flooding back, the stone circle, the whispers, the shadowy figure. I sat up abruptly, looking around in panic. But I was alone in a normal part of the forest, no stone circle in sight. Had it all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? I checked my phone, half expecting it to be fried or missing, but it was there in my pocket, seemingly undamaged. With shaking hands, I opened the gallery, scrolling through my recent photos, and there they were, images of the stone circle, the strange symbols, the paintbrush and boot in the center. It hadn't been a dream, it was all real. I staggered to my feet, my mind reeling. I had to tell someone, had to get help. But who would believe me? A story about magical stone circles and shadow monsters snatching people in the woods. They'd think I was crazy. No, I needed proof. Hard evidence that something supernatural was happening in Whispering Pines. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into researching the history of the park and the surrounding area. I pored over old newspapers, interviewed local historians, and even reached out to some of the indigenous elders in the nearby reservation. What I discovered was disturbing, to say the least. Whispering Pines, it turned out, had a long history of mysterious disappearances. Every few decades, there would be a cluster of vanishings, always in the same remote area of the park. The official explanations varied: animal attacks, getting lost in the wilderness, even the occasional suggestion of a serial killer operating in the area. But the pattern was clear to me now. Something ancient and malevolent was living in these woods, something that periodically awoke to feed on unsuspecting humans. As I delved deeper into my investigation, strange things began to happen. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find my windows frosted over, despite it being the middle of summer. I'd hear whispers in empty rooms, catch glimpses of shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye. And the dreams? God, the dreams were the worst. Every night I found myself back in that clearing, surrounded by the stone circle. The whispers were always there, pleading for help, begging for release. And always, lurking at the edge of the clearing, was the shadow walker, its featureless face somehow conveying a sense of hunger, of patient malice. I knew I was losing my grip on reality. My colleagues at the ranger station had started to give me worried looks, whispering among themselves when they thought I couldn't hear. I was becoming gaunt, haggard, my eyes sunken and haunted, but I couldn't stop. I knew that if I did, if I tried to walk away from this, more people would vanish. More souls would be trapped in that nightmarish realm between worlds. It all came to a head on a stormy night in late October. I was at home, poring over my notes for the 1000th time, trying to find some pattern, some weakness I could exploit. A crack of thunder shook the house, and the power went out, plunging me into darkness. As I fumbled for a flashlight, I heard it, a soft scratching at my front door. My blood ran cold. I knew with a certainty that defied logic what was out there. The shadow walker had come for me. For a long moment I stood frozen in the darkness, the beam of my flashlight trembling as it pointed at the door. The scratching continued, growing more insistent with each passing second. I knew I should run, should try to escape, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. Then, cutting through the sound of rain and thunder, I heard a voice, my voice. "Jack, let me in, Jack. I can explain everything." It was a perfect imitation, right down to the slight rasp I developed from years of shouting over windstorms. But I knew it wasn't me. It was the thing, the shadow walker, using my own voice against me. "You're not real," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You're not me." A low chuckle came from the other side of the door, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, but I am real, Jack. More real than you can imagine. And I'm not going away. Let me in, and I'll show you the truth about Whispering Pines, about the stone circle, about everything." I felt my resolve weakening. Part of me, the part that had been obsessed with solving this mystery for months, wanted to open that door, wanted to finally understand what was happening in my beloved forest. But another part, the part that still clung to sanity, knew that opening that door would be the end of me. In that moment of indecision, the choice was made for me. With a deafening crack, the door burst open, torn off its hinges by an unseen force. And there, silhouetted against the storm-tossed night, stood the shadow walker. It was somehow both shadow and substance, its form shifting and roiling like smoke, but with a solidity that defied physics. Those pinpricks of light that served as its eyes fixed on me, and I felt the weight of eons in that gaze. "Time to join the others, Jack," it said, still in my voice. It reached out with an impossibly long arm, shadowy fingers stretching towards me. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I turned and ran, bolting for the back door. I could hear it behind me, a sound like rustling leaves and creaking branches. I burst out into the rain-soaked night, my feet slipping on the wet grass as I sprinted for the tree line. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. But I didn't slow down. I could feel it behind me, an ancient, patient evil that had all the time in the world to hunt me down. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes blended into hours as I pushed deeper into the woods, my lungs burning, my legs trembling with exhaustion. Finally, unable to go any further, I collapsed against a massive old-growth tree, gasping for breath. As I sat there trying to get my bearings, a realization slowly dawned on me. I recognized this place. Even in the darkness, even in my panic, I knew where I was. I was in the clearing. The stone circle lay just a few yards away, the smooth rocks gleaming dully in the faint moonlight that filtered through the clouds. A sense of inevitability settled over me. Of course it had led me here. This was where it had always been leading me, from the moment I first set foot in this clearing months ago. Slowly I got to my feet. There was no point in running anymore. Whatever was going to happen would happen here. "All right," I called out, my voice hoarse. "I'm here. What do you want from me?" The shadows at the edge of the clearing seemed to deepen, to coalesce into a vaguely humanoid shape. The shadow walker emerged, its blank face turned towards me. "What do I want?" it said, its voice no longer an imitation of mine but something ancient and inhuman. "I want what I've always wanted, Jack. I want to feed, to grow, to expand my influence beyond this small patch of woods." It gestured at the stone circle. "Do you know what this really is, Jack? It's a doorway, a portal to a place beyond your comprehension. And with each soul I take, with each life I consume, that doorway opens a little wider." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold rain soaking through my clothes. "The disappearances," I said. "Lily, Marcus, all the others over the years. You took them." The shadow walker made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Took them? No, Jack. They're still here. Listen." And suddenly I could hear them. Whispers, cries, pleading voices emanating from the stones. Dozens, maybe hundreds of voices layered over each other in a cacophony of despair. "They're all here, Jack," the shadow walker said. "Their bodies gone, their souls trapped between worlds. And soon you'll join them." It began to move towards me, its form rippling and stretching. I backed away, but I knew there was nowhere to run. This was it. This was how it ended. But then, just as I felt the cold touch of shadow on my skin, a new sound cut through the night. A voice, clear and strong, speaking in a language I didn't understand. The shadow walker recoiled as if struck. I turned toward the source of the voice and saw a figure emerge from the trees. It was an old woman, her white hair gleaming in the moonlight, her face etched with wrinkles but her eyes bright and fierce. She continued to speak in that unknown language, her voice growing louder. With each word, the shadow walker seemed to shrink, to lose its solidity. "No!" it shrieked, its voice no longer human at all. "This is my domain. You have no power here." But the old woman didn't stop. She stepped forward, placing herself between me and the creature. From around her neck she pulled a small object, a stone, I realized, carved with symbols similar to those on the circle. The shadow walker howled, a sound of rage and pain that shook the very air. It lunged towards us, a last desperate attack. The old woman held up the stone. It began to glow with an inner light, brighter and brighter until I had to shield my eyes. There was a sound like a thunderclap, and a wave of force knocked me off my feet. When I looked up, the shadow walker was gone. The clearing was empty save for me and the old woman. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "It's not over," she said, her voice heavily accented. "The shadow walker is weakened but not destroyed, and the doorway still stands." I looked at the stone circle, still intact despite everything that had happened. "What do we do?" I asked. The old woman helped me to my feet. "We fight," she said simply. "We guard the doorway, we protect the innocent, and we find a way to free those already taken." As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. My days as a simple park ranger were over. A new chapter was beginning, one filled with ancient magics, malevolent entities, and a battle for the very soul of Whispering Pines. But as I stood there with my enigmatic new ally by my side and the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders, I knew one thing for certain. I would never stop fighting, for Lily, for Marcus, for all those lost to the shadows. The whispers of Whispering Pines had become a call to action, and I intended to answer it. Months have passed since that fateful night in the clearing. The old woman, whose name I learned was Aita, has become my teacher and partner in this strange new world I found myself in. She's a member of the local indigenous tribe, part of a long line of shamans who have been guarding the secrets of Whispering Pines for generations. Under her guidance, I've begun to learn the old ways, how to sense the presence of spirits, how to use the earth's natural energies to protect myself and others. It's been a challenging journey, filled with moments of frustration and self-doubt. But slowly, surely, I'm making progress. We've managed to keep the Shadow Walker at bay for now, but we know it's still out there, growing stronger, waiting for another chance to break through. And there are other threats too, other entities drawn to the power of the Stone Circle, other dark forces seeking to exploit the thin veil between worlds that exists in Whispering Pines. I still work as a park ranger, but my role has changed. Now I'm not just protecting the forest from wildfires and lost hikers. I'm protecting it, and the world beyond, from threats most people couldn't even imagine. We haven't yet found a way to free those trapped by the Shadow Walker, but we're working on it. Every night I return to the clearing, studying the symbols on the stones, listening to the whispers, searching for any clue that might lead to their release. Sometimes in my darkest moments, I wonder if I'm in over my head, if I should just walk away, leave this burden to someone else. But then I remember Lily's smile, Marcus's adventurous spirit, and all the others who have been lost to the shadows. And I know I can't give up. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Soon the night will come, and with it the dangers that lurk in the darkness, but I'm not afraid, not anymore. For I am Jack Hawthorne, guardian of Whispering Pines, and as long as I draw breath, I will stand against the shadows, protecting those who wander unknowing through my forest. The whispers continue, but now they don't fill me with dread. They remind me of my purpose, my duty, and as I shoulder my pack and head out into the gathering dusk, I whisper back a promise. I hear you, and I won't stop until you're free. The truth of what happened in those woods has haunted me for over 2 decades. Even now, as I sit here with a bottle of scotch and a half-smoked cigar, trying to piece together the fragments of memory, the very thought sends tremors through my aging bones. You might dismiss me as just another washed-up drunk, an old man clinging to tales of monsters and madness, but I assure you, what I'm about to tell you is as real as the jagged scar that runs down my left thigh, a constant reminder of that fateful night. My name is Samuel Hawthorne, and for most of my life I served as a forest ranger in the dense, sprawling wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. The year was 2001, and I was stationed at one of the most isolated outposts in the entire Cascade Range, a place known as Whispering Pines. The nearest town, a sleepy logging community called Millhaven, was nearly 60 miles away, accessible only by a treacherous, winding dirt road that seemed to deteriorate with each passing season. I had been at Whispering Pines for the better part of a decade by then, and I prided myself on knowing every trail, every stream, and every rocky outcropping in my jurisdiction. The locals respected me, the hikers trusted me, and the forest, well, I thought the forest and I had come to an understanding of sorts. How wrong I was. It all began on a crisp autumn evening, just as the sun was dipping below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I remember it vividly because it had been weeks since I'd heard a voice that wasn't my own, save for the occasional crackling message over the radio. The silence of Whispering Pines was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed for deep contemplation, but also had a way of playing tricks on the mind. The radio suddenly sprang to life, startling me from my solitary musings. Through the static, I could barely make out the voice of Diane, the dispatcher down in Millhaven, Sam, do you copy? We've got a situation up your way." I reached for the handset, my joints creaking in protest. "This is Hawthorne. Go ahead, Diane." "We've got a missing person report. Local teacher Emma Larson didn't return from a day hike. Her car's still at the Evergreen trailhead. You're the closest. Can you check it out?" I sighed, taking a long pull from my nearly empty glass of whiskey. Missing hikers weren't uncommon, especially not this time of year when the days grew shorter and the weather more unpredictable. But something about this call felt different, a premonition that sent a chill down my spine despite the warmth of the alcohol in my belly. "Copy that, Diane. I'm on my way. Any other details?" "Not much. She's 32, blonde, about 5'7", was wearing a red jacket and carrying a black day pack. Left a note saying she was planning to do the Evergreen loop. Should have been back by sunset." I glanced at my watch. It was already past 7 p.m., and sunset had been over an hour ago. If Emma was still out there, she was in for a long, cold night. "All right, I'm heading out now. I'll radio when I find something." I gathered my gear with practiced efficiency: flashlight, map, compass, first aid kit, and my trusty Remington 870 shotgun. In these woods, you never knew what kind of wildlife you might encounter, and I'd learned long ago that it was better to be over-prepared than caught off guard. As I stepped out onto the porch of my cabin, I was immediately struck by the stillness of the night. The usual chorus of crickets and night birds was eerily absent, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to press down on me from all sides. The stars overhead were unusually bright, twinkling with an almost feverish intensity against the inky black sky. I made my way to my old Ford Bronco, the gravel crunching loudly beneath my boots in the oppressive quiet. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow disturbing something that should have been left undisturbed. The drive to the Evergreen trailhead took about 45 minutes, the narrow forest road twisting and turning through the dense pine forest. As I drove, I couldn't help but feel like the trees were closing in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to snatch me from the safety of my vehicle. I pulled into the small parking area at the trailhead, my headlights illuminating a lone vehicle, a blue Subaru Outback that I assumed belonged to Emma Larson. I got out, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as I approached the car. It was locked, and a quick glance inside revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Just a woman's jacket draped over the passenger seat and a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder. I keyed my radio. "Diane, this is Hawthorne. I'm at the Evergreen trailhead. Found Larson's vehicle. No sign of her yet. I'm heading up the trail now." Only static answered me. I frowned, fiddling with the dial, but it was no use. The signal was dead, swallowed up by the vast wilderness around me. It wasn't entirely unusual to lose contact this far out, but it added another layer of unease to an already tense situation. With a deep breath, I set off down the Evergreen Trail, my powerful flashlight cutting a swath through the darkness. The trail was one I knew well, a 12-mile loop that wound its way through some of the most beautiful and treacherous terrain in the area. Under normal circumstances, it was a challenging but rewarding day hike. At night, with dropping temperatures and limited visibility, it could quickly become deadly. The first few miles were uneventful. The trail was well maintained, and I made good time, calling out Emma's name every few hundred yards. But as I ventured deeper into the forest, things began to change. The well-worn path became overgrown, choked with underbrush that I didn't remember being there on my last patrol. The trees seemed to grow denser, their branches intertwining overhead to block out what little starlight managed to penetrate the canopy. It was about 4 miles in when I found the first sign that something was terribly wrong. My flashlight beam caught a flash of red fabric, and my heart leapt into my throat. But it wasn't Emma. It was just a scrap of cloth snagged on a thorny bush beside the trail. I carefully removed it, examining it in the harsh light. It was definitely from a jacket, and the color matched the description of what Emma had been wearing. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. The fabric wasn't just torn, it was shredded, as if something with incredibly sharp claws had ripped through it. And there, barely visible against the red material, were a few drops of what could only be blood. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Emma," I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. Emma Larson, this is Ranger Hawthorne. Can you hear me? Only silence answered. I stood there for a long moment, straining my ears for any sound. A call for help, the snapping of a twig, anything. But there was nothing. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I pressed on, my senses on high alert. The trail became increasingly difficult to follow, twisting and turning in ways that didn't match my memory or the map. Several times I had to backtrack, certain that I had somehow strayed from the path, but each time I found myself right back where I started, as if the forest itself was leading me in circles. It was nearing midnight when I saw it, a faint, flickering light through the trees up ahead. My first thought was relief. Perhaps Emma had managed to start a fire. But as I drew closer, I realized it wasn't the warm glow of flames, but something altogether different. Hanging from a low branch was an old-fashioned lantern, its rusted metal frame housing a pale, bluish light that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The ground beneath it was disturbed, the dirt freshly turned as if something had been recently buried or unearthed. I approached cautiously, one hand on my shotgun. The air around the lantern was noticeably colder, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. As I drew closer, I noticed something carved into the trunk of the tree from which the lantern hung. At first I thought it was just random scratches, but as I shone my flashlight on it, I realized it was writing, but in no language I had ever seen before. The symbols were angular and alien, seeming to shift and change as I looked at them. A twig snapped behind me and I whirled around, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice sounding thin and frightened even to my own ears. For a moment there was nothing. Then from just beyond the reach of my flashlight I heard it, a low, guttural sound that was almost but not quite a growl. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before, a noise that seemed to come from something that had no right to exist in our world. I raised my shotgun, my hands shaking. "Show yourself," I shouted, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. In response, something moved in the darkness. It was just a flicker of movement, a shadow among shadows, but it was enough to send a jolt of pure, primal terror through my body. Whatever it was big, far larger than any animal native to these woods. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting between the strange lantern and the spot where I had seen the movement. That's when I noticed something else, a trail of footprints leading away from the disturbed earth. But these were no human footprints, nor those of any animal I recognized. They were huge, easily twice the size of my own feet, with long, curved claw marks gouging the soil at the end of each print. My training and experience warred with the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. I knew I should follow the tracks, try to find Emma, or at least some clue as to what had happened to her. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. In the end, duty won out over fear. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the shotgun, and began to follow the tracks. They led deeper into the forest, away from any trail I knew. The trees here were older, their gnarled trunks twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to leer at me as I passed. The ground became soggy beneath my feet, and I realized I was entering a part of the forest I had never seen before, a dark, swampy area that didn't appear on any of my maps. The tracks continued through the swamp, and I slogged after them, the mud sucking at my boots with each step. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and strange phosphorescent fungi clung to the trees, casting an eerie glow over the murky water. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that nightmarish landscape. But eventually, the ground began to slope upward, and I found myself climbing a steep hill. At the top, the trees opened up into a small clearing, and what I saw there nearly stopped my heart. In the center of the clearing was a ring of standing stones, each one easily 20 feet tall and covered in the same bizarre symbols I had seen on the tree with the lantern. They formed a perfect circle, and in the center of that circle was a sight that defied all logic and reason. It looked like a tear in the very fabric of reality, a shifting, swirling vortex of darkness that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Tendrils of inky blackness writhed and twisted in the air around it, and as I watched, horrified, I saw something begin to emerge from the impossible hole in the world. It came slowly at first, a mass of writhing tentacles and glistening ichorous flesh. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing, It burst forth fully into our world. The creature, if such a word could even apply to the monstrosity before me, was a nightmarish amalgamation of features that could not exist together. It had too many limbs, too many eyes, too many mouths filled with row upon row of needle-like teeth. And there, clutched in one of its massive clawed appendages, was a figure I recognized immediately as Emma Larson. She was unconscious, or worse, her body limp and unmoving in the creature's grasp. I stood there paralyzed with terror, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. This was impossible. It couldn't be real. And yet I could smell the creature's foul stench, could hear the wet slapping of its tentacles against the stone, could feel the malevolent intelligence in its myriad eyes as they all swiveled to focus on me. It was that gaze that finally broke me from my trance. With a yell that was equal parts defiance and terror, I raised my shotgun and fired. The blast echoed through the clearing, and I saw the creature recoil as the buckshot tore into its flesh. But the wounds closed almost instantly, the pellets pushed out by rapidly regenerating tissue. The creature let out a roar that shook the very ground beneath my feet. It dropped Emma and began to move towards me with terrifying speed, its numerous limbs propelling it across the clearing faster than anything that size had any right to move. I turned and ran, my feet slipping on the wet leaves as I plunged back into the forest. I could hear the creature behind me, trees splintering and crashing to the ground as it gave chase. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I don't know how long I ran, or how I managed to stay ahead of the creature. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving long past the point where I should have collapsed from exhaustion. At some point I became aware that the sounds of pursuit had faded, but I didn't dare stop. I kept running until suddenly I burst out of the tree line and found myself back at the evergreen trailhead. I stumbled to my Bronco, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I sped away from the trailhead, I chanced a glance in the rearview mirror. For just a moment I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette with too many limbs. But when I blinked, it was gone. I drove straight to the Millhaven Sheriff's office, bursting through the door wild-eyed and babbling about monsters and portals and impossible things. They didn't believe me, of course, how could they? But they couldn't ignore the fact that Emma Larson was still missing. A massive search was organized. Teams of rangers, local volunteers, and even a unit from the National Guard combed the forest for weeks. They found nothing. No sign of Emma, no strange lantern, no standing stones. The evergreen trail was just as it had always been, a well-maintained path through familiar woods. I tried to lead them back to the places I had seen, but it was as if the forest had rearranged itself. Nothing was where it should have been. After a while, people started to look at me with pity and suspicion. There were whispers about stress, about mental breakdowns, about drinking on the job. In the end, Emma Larson was declared dead, lost to the wilderness. I was quietly asked to resign from my position. My credibility was shot, my reputation in ruins. I couldn't stay in Millhaven, couldn't bear the looks of disappointment and distrust from people I had once considered friends. I moved away, tried to start a new life. But the memories of that night have never left me. Sometimes in my dreams I'm back in that clearing, watching as that impossible creature emerges from the void. I wake up screaming, the sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of terror bitter in my mouth. I've spent years trying to make sense of what happened, searching for any shred of evidence that might validate my experience. I've delved into obscure texts, spoken with experts in fields ranging from cryptozoology to quantum physics. I've found hints, whispers of similar encounters throughout history, but nothing concrete. There are times when I almost convince myself that it was all a hallucination, a nightmare born from too many years of solitude in the deep woods. But then I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that moves in a way shadow shouldn't, or a flicker of otherworldly light in the depths of a mirror, and I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that what I experienced was real. I've never returned to Whispering Pines. I couldn't bear to face those woods again, to confront the possibility that the barrier between our world and whatever lies beyond might still be thin in that godforsaken place. But I've kept tabs on the area over the years, watching for any signs that the horror I encountered might have re-emerged. There have been other disappearances since Emma Larson. Not many and not often enough to raise widespread alarm, but enough to form a pattern if you know what to look for. Every few years, a hiker goes missing, a camper fails to return, a local vanishes without a trace. The official reports always chalk it up to the dangers of the wilderness, accidents, animal attacks, people getting lost in the vast expanse of the forest. But I know better. I've tried to warn people, to make them understand the danger that lurks in those woods. But who would believe the ravings of a disgraced ex-ranger with a drinking problem? So I've had to content myself with more subtle methods, anonymously posting warnings on hiking forums, leaving cryptic messages at trailheads, doing whatever I can to keep people away from the deeper, darker parts of the forest. But I know it's not enough. Whatever I encountered that night, whatever took Emma Larson, it's still out there, waiting, watching. And I fear that one day, it might decide to venture beyond the confines of Whispering Pines. That's why I'm telling you this story now, not because I expect you to believe me. God knows I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived through it, but because someone needs to know. Someone needs to be prepared for the possibility that the horrors we relegate to campfire stories and urban legends might be more real than we dare to imagine. So if you ever find yourself in the Pacific Northwest, if you ever feel drawn to explore the pristine wilderness of the Cascade Range, remember this tale. And if you're hiking through a remote forest and you come across an old lantern hanging from a tree, casting an unnatural blue light, or if you see symbols carved into ancient bark that seem to shift and change as you look at them, or if you hear a low, guttural sound that raises the hair on the back of your neck, don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. Just turn around and run. Run as fast and as far as you can and don't look back. Because in Whispering Pines, in the deep dark heart of the forest where reality wears thin, there are things that defy explanation, things that shouldn't exist in our world. And once you've seen them, once you've caught their attention, you'll never truly escape. They'll haunt your dreams, linger at the edges of your vision, and wait patiently for the moment when you let your guard down. I know because they've been waiting for me for over 20 years now, and sometimes in the dead of night when the shadows seem to breathe and the silence presses in like a physical weight, I fear that their patience might finally be running out. So heed my warning, dear reader. Stay away from Whispering Pines. Stay on the well-traveled paths in the safe, familiar parts of the world. Because out there in the darkness, in the places where the maps fade to blank spaces, and the modern world feels like a distant memory, there are monsters, and they're hungry. As for me, I'll keep watching, keep warning for as long as I can. It's the only penance I can offer for my failure to save Emma Larson, the only way I can try to make amends for unleashing something ancient and terrible upon the world. And if, one day, you hear that an old man named Samuel Hawthorne has gone missing in a small town in the Midwest, far from any forest or wilderness, well, you'll know what really happened. Just promise me this. You'll remember my story. You'll stay vigilant. And most importantly, you'll stay the hell away from Whispering Pines. Because in those woods, in the shadows between the trees where reality fractures and sanity crumbles, something is waiting. And it remembers. It always remembers. I've been a forest warden for over 25 years, and I've seen my fair share of strange things. I've dealt with everything from reckless hikers who think they're invincible to experienced backpackers who find themselves disoriented in the dense wilderness, bewildered by the endless expanse of trees. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I encountered in the summer of 2012. My name is Jack Hawthorne, and I was stationed at Blackwood National Park, a remote wilderness area in the Pacific Northwest. It's a place where the ancient trees tower so high they seem to scrape the sky, and the fog rolls in so thick you could cut it with a knife. Blackwood is a place where the boundaries between reality and legend often seem to blur, a place where, if you listened closely enough, the forest whispered secrets you were never meant to hear. The summer of 2012 had been unusually dry, and with the looming threat of wildfires, I spent most of my days patrolling the trails, ensuring that visitors adhered to the strict fire regulations. The park was quieter than usual, with fewer tourists braving the sweltering heat and the risk of wildfire. But there was one group that stood out, a small family that had decided to camp deep within the forest, far from the designated camping areas. I first encountered them one crisp morning as I made my rounds. There was Thomas Sullivan, a man in his late 30s with a scruffy beard and eager eyes, his wife Sarah, a petite woman with a warm smile and a cautious demeanor, and their young daughter Emma, a precocious 8-year-old with wild curls and an insatiable curiosity. They were cheerful, excited to be in the wilderness, and eager to experience nature in its rawest form. "You folks know you're pretty far off the beaten path, right?" I asked, eyeing their heavy backpacks and camping gear. Thomas grinned, his eyes gleaming with a kind of reckless abandon. "That's the whole point, Warden. We're here for the full experience. The further from civilization, the better." I warned them about the dangers of camping outside the designated areas, but they seemed unfazed, even brushing off my concerns with light-hearted jokes. Sarah looked a bit nervous, but Emma was bouncing with excitement, pointing at every bird and squirrel she saw. "Just be careful," I said sternly. "Stay on the trails, and make sure you have enough supplies. Cell reception is spotty out here, and it's easy to get turned around." They nodded, though I could tell Thomas was only half listening. As they headed off into the dense forest, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. Maybe it was the way Thomas's eyes gleamed with that reckless abandon, or perhaps it was just my instincts honed by years in the wilderness. But they were within their rights to camp wherever they wished, so I let them go, with one last reminder to be careful. A few days passed, and I didn't think much about the Sullivan family until I noticed that their car was still parked in the same spot near the trailhead. It wasn't unusual for people to spend a few days camping, but something gnawed at me, a feeling that I couldn't quite shake. I decided to check on them, just to be sure they were okay. The hike to where they'd set up camp was about 5 miles off the main trail, through dense underbrush and along paths that were more animal tracks than human trails. It was the kind of place where few dared to venture, a place where the forest closed in around you, muffling the sounds of the outside world. As I approached their campsite, the first thing that struck me was the silence. The usual forest sounds, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, even the distant hum of insects, were absent. It was as if the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself moving more cautiously, my hand resting on the bear spray at my hip. The campsite itself was a mess. The tent was torn, one of the poles snapped in half, and the remnants of their gear were scattered across the ground. But what caught my attention most was the fire pit. It was surrounded by small twisted figures made from sticks and twine, arranged in a circle around the ashes. The figures looked like crude representations of people, their limbs contorted into unnatural positions. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Mr. Sullivan? Mrs. Sullivan? Emma? Is anyone here?" There was no response. My heart raced as I searched the area, hoping to find the family safe and sound. But the more I looked, the more apparent it became that they were gone, vanished without a trace. I radioed for backup, and soon a search team was combing the forest. We searched for days, but there was no sign of the Sullivans. No tracks, no belongings, nothing. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. The only clue we had was a notebook I found near the remains of their campfire. It belonged to Thomas, filled with sketches of the forest and notes about their trip. But toward the end of the notebook, the sketches became darker, more frantic. The last few pages were covered in drawings of strange creatures, tall, shadowy figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, blending into the trees. The notes became erratic, with phrases like, "It watches us, and we are not alone," scrawled in the margins. The search was eventually called off, and the official report listed the Sullivan family as missing, presumed dead. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister had happened. I've always been a rational man, someone who believes in facts and logic, but after that summer I started to question everything I thought I knew. I spent countless nights poring over Thomas's notebook, trying to make sense of the drawings and the cryptic notes. I even began researching local legends and folklore, desperate to find an explanation for what had happened. That's when I stumbled upon stories of a creature known to the indigenous tribes of the area, a being they called the Wendigo. According to legend, the Wendigo was a spirit of the forest, a malevolent force that preyed on those who ventured too deep into the woods. It was said to be a creature of insatiable hunger, one that could take on the form of a human or animal, but always with something off: eyes that were too large, limbs that moved in unnatural ways. The more I read, the more the pieces seemed to fit. The Sullivans had camped in an area known for strange disappearances, a place where even the locals refused to go. And the sketches in Thomas's notebook, those twisted, shadowy figures, looked eerily similar to the descriptions of the Wendigo. I knew it sounded crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the Sullivans had encountered something in the woods. Something ancient and hungry. I tried to tell myself that it was just a legend, that there was a logical explanation for what had happened. But deep down, I knew there was something more to it. I couldn't forget the silence at their campsite, the way the forest had seemed to close in around me, and those stick figures arranged around the fire pit like some kind of offering. I kept the notebook, though I never showed it to anyone else. I didn't want to be labeled as a crackpot, another warden who'd spent too much time alone in the woods, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. It was a reminder of that summer, of the family that had vanished without a trace, and of the secrets the forest kept hidden. Years passed, and I tried to put it behind me, but every time I patrolled that part of the forest I felt it, the weight of the trees pressing down, the feeling that something was watching from the shadows. I'd hear things too, strange noises in the night that I couldn't quite explain, rustling in the underbrush, whispers carried on the wind, and once the sound of footsteps trailing behind me. Though when I turned there was no one there. Then about 5 years after the incident, I got a call from a young couple who had decided to go hiking in the same area where the Sullivans had disappeared. They were frantic, saying they'd found something strange in the woods, something that made them feel like they were being watched. I rushed out to meet them, and when I arrived, they led me to a small clearing not far from the old campsite. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a rancid, rotting stench that hung in the air like a thick fog. The couple pointed to a large tree at the edge of the clearing, and that's when I saw it. There, hanging from the branches, were more of those twisted stick figures, just like the ones I'd found years ago. But these were different. They were larger, more intricate, and each one had something tied to it: pieces of cloth, small bones, even strands of hair. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached the tree, the ground beneath my feet soft and spongy. And then I saw what was causing the smell. At the base of the tree was a shallow pit, half covered with dirt and leaves. Inside were the remains of a body, badly decomposed and almost unrecognizable. But I knew deep down that it was Thomas Sullivan. His clothes, though tattered and stained, matched the description in the missing persons report. The sight of that body confirmed what I had feared all along, that something in those woods had taken the Sullivan family, something that was still out there, waiting. We called in the authorities, and the area was cordoned off for investigation. The official report listed the death as an animal attack, but I knew better. The way the body had been hidden, the stick figures hanging from the tree, it wasn't the work of any animal I'd ever encountered. After that, I refused to patrol that part of the forest alone. I didn't care what anyone thought. I'd seen enough, and I wasn't going to be the next one to disappear. To this day, I still don't know what really happened to the Sullivans, or what I encountered in those woods, but I do know this. There are places in this world where the lines between reality and legend blur, places where the old stories are more than just tales to scare children, and sometimes, if you're not careful, those stories have a way of finding you. I left the Park Service a few years after the discovery of Thomas's body. The nightmares were getting worse, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was always just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. I moved to a small town far from Blackwood Forest, trying to put as much distance between myself and those woods as possible. But even now, I can't escape it. Every so often I'll hear something in the night, a soft rustling, a faint whisper carried on the breeze, and I'll find myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it's found me again. I can't help but think back to that summer, to the Sullivan family that vanished without a trace, and to the twisted figures hanging from the trees like dark omens. There are some things in this world that we're not meant to understand, things that defy explanation. And sometimes the only thing you can do is survive long enough to tell the story. But that doesn't mean you're safe, because the forest never forgets, and neither does the thing that lives within it. As I sit here writing this account, I can't help but wonder if sharing this story is wise. Part of me hopes that by putting it out there, I might find others who have experienced similar things, that together we might unravel the mystery of what lurks in the depths of Blackwood Forest. But another part of me fears that by speaking its name, by acknowledging its existence, I might be inviting it into my life once more. I've tried to move on, to build a new life away from the shadows of the forest. I got married, had kids of my own, but I've never told them about what happened in Blackwood. How could I? They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they'd believe me and live their lives in fear of something they can't see or understand. But sometimes when we're out camping or hiking, I'll catch myself scanning the tree line, looking for those elongated shadows, listening for whispers on the wind. And I'll hold my children a little closer, urging them to stay on the trail, to respect the wilderness but never to trust it completely. Because I know now that there are ancient things in this world, things that have existed long before us and will continue long after we're gone. Things that see us not as the dominant species we believe ourselves to be, but as prey, as playthings, as sacrifices to powers we can't comprehend. I don't know if what took the Sullivans was truly the Wendigo of legend, or something else entirely, but I do know that it's still out there, waiting. And sometimes in my darkest moments, I wonder if it's not just confined to Blackwood Forest. What if there are other places, other forests, where similar entities lurk? What if they're spreading, growing stronger as we push further into their domains? These are the thoughts that keep me up at night, that make me double-check the locks on my doors and windows, because deep down I know that no matter how far I run, no matter how much I try to forget, a part of me will always be back in those woods, standing in that clearing, surrounded by those twisted stick figures and the lingering scent of decay. So if you're reading this, consider it a warning. Respect the wilderness, enjoy its beauty, but never forget that there are places where humans don't belong, places where the old magic still holds sway, where ancient hunger still roams free. And if you ever find yourself in a forest where the silence is too deep, where the shadows seem to move of their own accord, remember the story of the Sullivans. Remember, and run, because in the end, that might be all you can do. Run and hope that whatever's chasing you isn't faster, isn't hungrier, isn't more patient than you are, and pray that if you do escape, it doesn't follow you home. As for me, I'll keep watching, keep listening, because even though I've left the forest, I'm not sure the forest has ever truly left me. And in the whisper of the wind through the trees, in the creak of a floorboard in the dead of night, I'll always be listening for the call of the Wendigo, hoping against hope that it hasn't found me again. Because in Blackwood Forest and perhaps in other dark corners of the world, the line between legend and reality is thinner than we'd like to believe. And sometimes the stories we tell around the campfire are more than just stories. Sometimes they're warnings, warnings we'd do well to heed. So the next time you're in the wilderness and you feel that prickle on the back of your neck, that sense that something's watching you from just beyond the tree line, don't ignore it. Don't brush it off as imagination or nerves, because maybe, just maybe, there's something out there in the darkness, something hungry, something patient, something that's been waiting a very, very long time for you to wander just a little too far off the path. And if you hear a whisper on the wind, a voice that sounds almost but not quite human, well then it might already be too late. But you can try running, it's what I did. And somehow, against all odds, I survived to tell this tale. But remember, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Just because you've left the forest doesn't mean the forest has left you. So be careful out there. And whatever you do, don't go looking for the Wendigo, because you just might find it. Or worse, it might find you.